Well, good morning, everybody. Good morning, everybody. Good morning. If I could have your attention, we're going to start this morning off with a rap session. You're in the fold. I'm not old. No, that's not going to. I want your empathy, not your sympathy. That doesn't work. My name is Jim Munson. I am a former senator, a former everything, I guess, now. I always tell people, do you know who I think I was? And they don't. But I am the chair of the board of the Victoria Forum. And before we begin our official ceremonies this morning, I acknowledge with respect the Lekwungen people on whose traditional territory the University of Victoria stands, and the Songhees, Esquimalt, and Wasanich peoples whose historical relationship with the land continues to this day. In a moment, I'm going to introduce, of course, Elder Butch Dick, who will give us a welcome. And if it's anything like yesterday's welcome, it's very moving, sometimes melancholic, but most of the time very positive about the circle that we're in. But this morning, you know, sometimes when things happen to you that you don't expect to happen, and it feels like there's a message there, and I'm going to try to figure that out with maybe Miles Richardson will help me with this. But as I walked through the lobby of the hotel this morning, and on a table, there was a book by itself, just sitting there. And nobody seemed to own this book, but it was there. And the title of the book was, You Were Made for This World. And when you wake out sometimes in the morning with a few self-doubts and you see a book sitting there saying, you were made for this world. And then I looked again at it, and the foreword in the book was by my dear friend, Murray Sinclair, and edited by Stephanie Sinclair and Sarah. And it just took me a moment to reflect, because the book apparently is about Indigenous voices for the youth. But like Joe Clark, I still feel very young. Joe is much older than I am. I'll only be 80 next year. So, but it was just there. You were made for this world. And I walked with it and used it as sort of a symbol from nowhere, auspicious as an occasion as it was, that just motivated me to be comfortable with you this morning. So with that, I'd like to introduce Elder Butch Dick.
Good morning. I trust you had a good time at the Wellness Center last night. You're all looking bright and early. That's a good thing. It's gonna be another hot day. And what our ancestors used to call Metulia, probably because they couldn't pronounce Victoria. But my name is Butch Dick. I'm an elder from the Songhees Nation. And it's my great honor to be here to welcome each and every one to the traditional land of the Songhees Nation and the Esquimalt Nation. University proper is on Chikonen house land, our traditional territory. And it used to be a very large village just down the road from here, as was villages all along the coast of Victoria. It's very important to understand traditional lands and the territories of the two nations. There was Chikonen, Chilkowich, Schwenhung, Ko Samson, Titsamitsa, and Wyoming, all along the coast. So just about every place you could find a creek or a river where there's fresh water meeting salt water, there usually was a village site, along with hunting and fishing sites included in that. We recognize these lands as our traditional territory, and also the realization of how many municipalities there is located on our traditional lands and the hundreds and thousands of people that now live here. We also recognize our neighboring nations of the Saanich people. My mother was from Saanich, and my grandparents and great-grandparents. So recognizing traditional lands is vital. It should be included in just about everyone's orientation package. And all of that really is there to create awareness of the original people of the land. It's a great opportunity to be here to welcome you. And was interesting traveling up here this morning. Those of you that probably drove here realize how much work is going on in Victoria and how long it takes to get from one place to another. I would be remiss if I didn't acknowledge the people from other lands that have traveled here. I met two people from Ontario. Have to acknowledge Ontario because I'm a Toronto Maple Leaf fan. Thank you, there's other fans out there, that's good. So Asi Amnu Chialacha, Asi Amnu Shwalaka, Aishka Kwansana Techel, Lakwangan Tanuk, Aishka Siem, Duquilia. And that's a language, Lakwagan. And there's many revitalization language programs going all over southern Vancouver Island. And a lot of it's been led by young people. And they realize the need that we have to revitalize languages because the teachings are attached to the language and the teachings are attached to the land. And that's probably the most important thing that we have to look at in this day and age with climate change. So I'm a great activist for climate change and for youth education. And I realize that during your forum, you'll probably discuss a lot of important things to this world. And I approach every day by being genuine and sincere and just an ordinary person. So I'll finish today with a paddle welcome song. The song comes from the Cowichan Valley and was part of the Zinqua opera a long, long time ago. And the song was taught to me by my uncle from Cowichan, and he said to carry it in a good way to good people. So I'll sing the song and then I'll be on my way. I wish you well today and throughout your forum. Relax, enjoy Victoria, enjoy Lakwagan land. To my drum, about 35 years old, we treat drums like relatives. If you treat them well, they'll treat you well. Paiskas him. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Butch, for that. Before I get into some of the official business, I think a QR code is going to show up on the screen behind me for nous avons translation. I think we have 61 langues. So you want to do that, you can listen to any language that you prefer this morning, and that will be for all our sessions, I understand. Just thinking and listening to the drum of Butch, and I keep thinking back to, I don't know what it is about this because of this morning, but I keep thinking back to Murray St. Clair. I was in the Senate before Murray, and I covered a lot of stories that Murray was involved in. But he became my guidance. He became my light in the Senate. And he'd always, when I got a little irritated at things, he would always look at me and say, James, and I would calm down. He would, so I just feel quite emotional about him, because I think for me, one of my proudest moments of being part of the Victoria Forum since its inception in 2017 was within this circle that I helped with others to facilitate senators to become part of our discussion. And we have, I think, almost 15 senators here today. And over the last many sessions that we've had, one of the comments I keep hearing over and over again from people who are in civil society, academia, politics, business, that it's wonderful to have the policy maker inside the room, that we don't have to call somebody, send somebody. They are here, they are with us. And I think that collaborative approach in what we're trying to achieve with this forum, with the guidance of Saul and Adele and Stephen and many others, I think we're getting there, and we have still a long way to go. Very briefly, before I introduce the panel, I listened to some phrases. There's one phrase I still have to work out. Talk to a tree. I have to talk to Miles about that. But if you are into all the sessions here and you find it very difficult sometimes to comprehend some of the arguments and debates going on, we are on the University of Victoria campus. So if you need that moment, and I'm getting it, to go out and talk to a tree or listen to a bird, do it. Because I think that's part and parcel of taking a breath from all the things that we're going to be hearing and listening today. Yesterday, there were just a few phrases that struck me. I always like to stay on the positive side of the track. Here's some of the phrases. We have to work together. There is power in words. Use our moral compass to guide us. Remember the light within us. We have a job to do. All we want to be is who we are. When you stand up, you have to pay a price. Well, the price here is a good price, because my takeaway from yesterday's discussions is that despite the turbulence times we live in, and even though we have a long way to go to get to in the next 5 years to reach the UN Sustainable Development Goals, the human spirit is alive and well in this room. I can borrow a phrase from our Indigenous brothers and sisters. This is our circle, isn't it? This is our circle of trust and of sharing ideas in shifting the trajectory towards a better future. And so with that, that's my little sermon this morning. I'm a United Church minister's son. I can't help myself. So I'm a spiritual guy. The rest of it, I'm not so sure about. But in any case, I'd like to introduce Diane Gibson as the moderator of our first panel this morning. Saul told me not to talk very long about it, just to introduce her. So that's what I'm going to do. As you know, she's the MLA and Minister of Citizen Services for the province of British Columbia, and I'll ask her and the panelists to come on stage to take us on this journey of learning and understanding. Thank you very much.
All right, can you hear me? Yeah, excellent. Thank you so much for that generous welcome, and thank you everybody for participating in this important discussion. Many of you heard last night in the opening discussion conversations around the high level of with sort of general geopolitics and SDG and ideas of how we can lean into this conference title in terms of making the transition happen. And today we're going to have a bit more of a specific discussion around the Sustainable Development Goals. And we'll start with Vanessa, who is Vanessa Albiu, sorry, I've already met Albiu, who is a senior performance auditor with the Office of the Auditor General of Canada. And they report on the performance of the SDG commitments. And so I know that Vanessa has a few slides that'll talk a little bit about the performance on the SDGs and share a little bit with us on the data side. So we'll get started with some of the data that'll launch the rest of the panel, and we'll do follow-up introductions around discussing how we're performing.
Great, thank you, Diana. And I'm so excited to be here to have these important discussions. As mentioned, I'm an environmental auditor with the Office of the Auditor General of Canada, and I specifically work under the Commissioner of the Environment and Sustainable Development. If I could just get the next slide up. So the Commissioner's role has been around since 1995. And the commissioner is responsible for reporting on the federal government's environmental and sustainable development programs. He's also responsible for the environmental petitions process, as well as reporting on the Canadian Net Zero Emissions Act and commenting on the federal government's draft federal sustainable development strategy. In this role, I've been fortunate to work on a variety of different environmental audit topics, such as climate mitigation and adaptation, how the government's doing on the SDGs, freshwater topics, contaminated sites in the north, as well as biodiversity topics. So this summer in June, the commissioner released a lessons learned report that was specific to sustainable development. And this report looks at 30 years of Canadian action in sustainable development. It also includes an analysis of our office's past audits and what we've learned from the recommendations that we've provided to the federal government. And we've also, through this report, talked to experts in the field that work in sustainable development day to day. And through that, the report identifies trends in Canadian efforts and offers 6 lessons learned on how we could potentially move forward. So I'm going to first talk about how Canada is doing. So if I could grab the next slide, please. So we can see that Canada is performing relatively well on the 17 SDGs compared to OECD and high-income countries. But on the next slide, while Canada's score has been above average for OECD and high-income countries, we are performing lower than our counterparts in the G7. And if we're looking at the rate of change, on the next slide, please. So Canada's been the slowest to make progress among G7 countries. And based on the data, Canada's achieved or is on track to meet 47% of the 168 targets associated with the 17 goals. And we've made limited progress on 26% and worsening progress on 27% of the global targets. So Canada struggled in goals such as SDG 12, responsible consumption and production, SDG 13, climate action, SDG 15, life on land, just to name a few. And additionally, when we're having these conversations, when we're talking about high-income countries, it's important to talk about spillover effects as well. So that's the measure of the impact that a country's actions have, either positive or negative, on another country's ability to achieve the SDGs. So while Canada is doing relatively better than other G7 countries in this area, we still are challenged with impacts embodied through trade, such as greenhouse gas emissions, nitrogen emissions, and air pollution associated with imports, as well as exports of plastic waste, for example.
Thank you so much. Lots to unpack there for our panel. So I'll now introduce you to our second speaker, Frances Edmonds, Head of Sustainable Impact at HP Canada. Frances, as a sustainability leader in Canada's tech sector, can you please describe your work at HP and a little bit about the Federal Sustainable Development Strategy Advisory Panel that you're part of, and how you view the situation described in Vanessa's SDG-focused presentation?
Thank you. Just want to thank the organizers and especially our volunteers today, which we have a lot of, so delight to be here. And specifically to say thank you to Vanessa. I currently sit on the Federal Minister of Environment and Climate Change's advisory panel for the strategy for Canada. It's called the FSDS, the Federal Sustainable Development Strategy. And I've been on that panel for 4 or 5 years now, and Vanessa's report actually helped me contextualize what I'm trying to do there, which was interesting because I should have had that really. So the next round of people on the panel will also have that as a guidepost, I guess. And obviously the data that you produce as well. So a little bit about HP Canada. I'm the business person in the audience here. So today, HP Canada calls ourselves Canada's most sustainable technology company. And I do have legal approval to say that, even under the new anti-greenwashing legislation, which is no small feat. So just so you know that, you can check it out on our website. And I spent the first half of my career at HP getting us to the point where we could call ourselves Canada's most sustainable technology company. And then I got a new CEO and I took it to her and showed her what we do. And she said, well, that's really great, Frances, but it would appear our customers don't care. And I said, what do you mean? And she said, well, if you look at how the average organization in Canada, and remember, we sell to everybody, governments, nonprofits, for-profits. If you look at how they buy, there are no questions on sustainability, no questions on sustainable development goals. And if there are questions, they're not even relevant scored points. And she said to me, Frances, I'd like you to change that. So our strategy from a corporate social responsibility perspective, we call it CSR 2.0, where we're trying to change the ecosystem around us so that more businesses will step up and do more on sustainability. And I think if we added SDGs into that as a Rubicon or a lexicon to help them get to where they need to be, we would be a lot further ahead. Now, when you think about a capitalist economy, a business exists to delight our customers. That's why we're here. We want to make our customers happy. And if the questions that are asked at the point of sale don't reflect what's important to you, which it often does not, then we're missing the important lever. And I have lots of experience in this, in trying to move other businesses in Canada to do more. We sell through a value chain of channel partners. We created a program to help them become more sustainable. We give it to them for free. We actually pay them really to do the work. And it's flying off the shelf in other countries. It's a really hard sell in Canada. And that's simply because their customers are not asking them to do it. So without that market signal, we're never going to get any closer to the SDGs, I would argue. And it's not a government alone function. The Federal Sustainable Development Strategy, and we'll probably get into this a little more around SDG 17 of how do we collaborate to make movement on the SDGs. The Federal Sustainable Development Strategy outlines the different actors that are going to play, and we all have a role to play. It's not simply a government job to do. So if you think about Vanessa's recommendations in particular, let's take the example of reconciliation. So the federal government effectively ghettoizes procurement from a reconciliation standpoint. They say 5% of spend or 10% of spend needs to be spent with 51% owned Indigenous businesses. Do we even know if that supports Indigenous reconciliation? I don't know. Nobody knows really. But the Truth and Reconciliation Report, Section 92, has a requirement for all businesses to do things. So why are we only asking 5% of the spend or 10% of the spend? Why aren't we asking all businesses to do reconciliation? We're a decade past the Truth and Reconciliation Report and virtually no businesses have done anything. How do we stimulate them to do that? We give them points at where it matters in the procurement cycle. So that's a good example. So I'd come back to Vanessa's recommendations around, we do need better metrics, but I don't know that we're going to get there in the next 5 years. And this sense of urgency should be upon all of our backs. Really, it is 5 years that we need to get there. And maybe we won't have the metrics in time. Maybe we need to be okay with some uncertainty and just doing the right thing because it's the right thing to do. I'll stop there.
Thank you. Certainly, it is a unique moment in terms of the SDGs and geopolitics for us to make decisions in the public and private sectors in different ways, and we're shaking it up. So this gives me the opportunity to introduce Jane Barlow, Director of Programs at the Global Center for Pluralism. The monitor that they have, the Global Monitor, reports on the state of issues from gender equity and social equity to economic inclusion in countries around the world. So in that context, can you tell us a little bit about what it's like leading this work in the current geopolitical context?
Well, thank you, Diana. Thank you. And thank you to the organizers also and volunteers today. That is a really good and possibly loaded question. Honestly, with the global attention now focused so much on security and issues of trade, I think it has never been more important for us all to ensure that our increasingly scarce resources and funds and efforts are truly well targeted and more effectively addressing and identifying underlying sources of exclusion and inequalities in societies. To answer your question, I think I have to tell you just a little bit about what our center does and why. We were founded under a partnership between the Government of Canada and His Late Highness the Aga Khan IV, really in recognition that finding effective ways to live together across our differences has always been and will continue to be an urgent global need. The work of pluralism is really to guide the actions and choices we can make as individuals and as societies to recognize and work across our differences. And even when doing so is difficult and complicated. And we were established here in Canada with the understanding that while imperfect and incomplete, this work as Canadians, and we as Canadians recognize the need to continue to commit to working across our many differences as possibly necessary to our very survival as a nation. And while this work may be hard, this is essential to taking the kinds of collective efforts needed to address some of the most pressing needs brought up by the SDGs today, and those facing the global community. It's simply a fact that when we engage with differences constructively, we're better at solving problems. We are better at building our societies. We're better at building our economies. We're better at innovating and at solving and resolving conflicts. So the center's commitment to pluralism reflects a deep belief that diversity can be a source of strength and dynamism in society. But we also know that diversity in so many societies is viewed by states and societal actors too often as a risk to be mitigated or a threat to be suppressed. And as a result, we too often see a rise in marginalization and exclusions and even direct harm to communities based on their identity markers, such as religion, ethnicity, language, gender, and so forth. So the center's work really focuses on better understanding what makes societies more or less pluralistic, to identify and share some of the effective approaches that we're finding to living peacefully together as diverse societies. And one of the ways we do this work is through our Global Pluralism Monitor. And I think we have a slide if it comes up. But really the monitor is a tool designed to measure exclusions and inclusions across based on group identity across a range of dimensions, political, economic, and social. We look at data across 20, oh, there it is. We look at data across 20 indicators to assess a country's legal commitments to pluralism. We look at the extent to which those legal commitments are implemented. We look at the role of different societal actors in advancing or eroding pluralism, such as the media, political parties, the private sector for sure, and civil society. We also look at the extent of group-based inequalities across political, economic, and social dimensions. And then finally, we look at the degree of intergroup trust in institutions, and the extent to which people really feel that they belong in their societies. And beyond providing insights or sort of a snapshot on where a society is in its pluralism journey, the monitor, through our partnerships with civil societies in assessed countries, is really informing progress on the ground that is addressing some of the really difficult issues facing groups in different societies. And I think that this really stands as a point of hope for the SDGs and relates directly to a lot of the work that still needs to be done under the SDGs, as we'll hear about more as we go through the session. You did ask what it's like to do this work. Very quickly, I would say it's both a privilege and a source of hope for me personally and for our organization. We work with many partners around the world in the 20 countries that we are assessing, and we're seeing actors from civil society, government, and the research community use this data to inform really positive work in their societies. And I'll just give you maybe 2 examples if I have time. In Ghana, we work with a coalition that's working on affirmative action and had been working for a long time on the passage of an affirmative action bill that had language for over a decade in Ghana. They used our report to really sort of catalyze and reinvigorate attention to the issues of gender, but how they intersect with issues of ethnicity and regional inequalities across the country. And very happily, that bill finally passed just a year ago. In Colombia, and I know we have a Colombian delegation at the forum this year. So, I'd love to, I'm really excited to engage with you all. But our work with Colombian partners, we're working with a coalition of indigenous and Afro-Colombian activists that is looking to address the lack of implementation of the ethnic chapter of the 2016 Peace Accord. And they've been using our tools and our resources to innovate a new way to monitor the lack of implementation of the recommendations made in the Peace Accord, improving the outcomes for some of the communities that have been having to deal with some of the worst violence ongoing and after the conflict. I think I'll stop there because I think I've spoken long enough, but.
Thank you. Such a great set of different perspectives on some of the opportunities before us and the gap that we need to close. So useful data, but also, that 5 years from now, it's a pretty daunting challenge, particularly given that Trump administration representatives have disavowed the SDGs altogether. So in that context, I'm taking it back to Vanessa to talk about the lessons learned part of the Auditor General's report, where the intention is to help us renew and accelerate the progress and close that gap. I'm not sure if that report was after the SDGs had already been disavowed by the Trump administration's spokesperson, but can you explain a little bit about those lessons learned and what they can tell us about how we can close the gap?
Yes, and I think there's a slide for that. But I will start off saying that for the past 30 years, Canada set national targets and contributed to setting international targets through, for example, the Federal Sustainable Development Strategy and our commitment to the UN SDGs. And we've established ourselves as international leader in providing a legislative base for sustainable development through the Federal Sustainable Development Act. But as I mentioned earlier, despite these commitments, Canada has had difficulty making substantial improvements in our performance towards sustainable development. Additionally, through the Auditor General's Office and the Commissioner of the Environment, we have been reporting on Canada's performance towards sustainable development since 1998. And what we're seeing is that issues stemming from previous audits are still persisting today, like the need for strong national strategy, clear accountability, public awareness, and collaboration among all actors. So this report presents 6 lessons learned. These include strengthening leadership at the national level, an integrated approach to sustainable development planning, enhanced collaboration among key players, a specific focus on greater engagement with Indigenous governments and people, improved tracking and reporting, and a long-term approach to protect future generations. So in each lesson, we discuss the challenges that the government has faced over these 3 decades and point to opportunities as a path forward. Oftentimes, we're pointing to examples, whether international or provincial, things that could be a path forward for Canada. In each lesson, we're also asking critical questions of parliamentarians to consider. Now, these questions are not just for government, they're things that other organizations or even Canadians can think about. But our intention with this report is that it's going to assist parliamentarians in holding government to account, that it's going to build Canadians' awareness of the importance of fostering sustainable development. It suggests opportunities for Canada to turn its sustainable development commitments into lasting results for Canadians. And as one of the roles of the commissioner is to comment on the federal government's draft federal sustainable development strategy, with the 6th strategy being issued in 2026, we're hoping this report will lead to some discussions and a path forward for this next report.
Thank you. And what kind of response have you been getting to that set of lessons learned and recommendations?
Yeah, so the report was just tabled in June. So we have had media attention, and it's of interest to NGOs, and we're expecting parliamentary hearings in the fall. But ultimately, we're hoping that the decision makers will look at the questions that we're posing to them as a path forward. And ultimately, the feedback we're hoping for is action. It would be a good first step that our next report like this shows improvements and less pitfalls in the way to sustainable development.
Thank you so much. And we are going to turn to the audience shortly for a response. But before we do, I wanted to kind of circle back to the other 2 panel members in terms of what their response is to these lessons learned. And as we know, the theme this year, shifting the trajectory towards a better future, is really about how we come together individually and collectively to take action. So that's really what this conference and the next part of this panel is about. And so I'll get each of the panelists to speak a little bit to how they respond to that. And Francis, start with you in terms of how do we make SDG 17 come alive? What actions can we take? And you as a triple strength leader, and for academics in the room, how are you making your institutions walk the talk and teaching and researching this? So taking that one SDG, but so generally responding to Vanessa's report and also taking that specific SDG 17 response.
So if I could just get the slide that I missed on the first panel. So this walking the talk piece is really important. And I'm going to ask each and every one of you to go back to your organizations and take this definition of sustainable procurement, because every one of your organizations is buying things, and think about implementing this. It's probably the fastest tool you have. It's going to require that triple strength leadership of working across departments, within organizations, without organizations. And this definition comes from Dr. Bob Willard, who has a whole bunch of tools and resources, Sustainability Advantage. You can take he gives them away for free. So it's not that you don't have the tools and resources to implement this, but we really need people to walk the talk. Lots of organizations have purpose and goals, But when you look at how they buy, it's not reflected at all. There's a complete disconnect. And I could guarantee you for 99.99% of you, that will be the truth in your own organization. So go back and lift the hood and have a look. I get the luxury of seeing all of these documents from across the country from all sectors, and it's pretty depressing, I have to say. So I'm waiting to be delighted. And just sort of speaking to that triple strength leadership, we've got 5 years. We don't have time to develop new leaders. You are all leaders. I need each and every one of you to take that baton and run with it. Don't ask for permission, go for it. Like, a house literally depends on it, right? And I think one of the things I've learned from my very long career as a sustainability professional is if you wait and ask for permission, nobody's really got the permission to give it to you because it's a relatively new field. So you just, I mean, you don't tread on toes, but you gently take the reins and you go for it. And, you know, given that 5-year timeline, really want to encourage you all. So I'll stop.
Thank you so much. And so Jane, I know there was a couple of things that you mentioned that I think that really struck me around the need to really target our efforts and our resources. So as we see that pushback, it's never more critical than now to not just take agency and action, but also to ensure that we're targeting those to be the most effective we could be. And then the other piece that really struck me was that bridging difference. And I think that we heard in the panel last night that although fear is galvanizing, hope is more so, and belonging is key to that hope. And so that conversation you had around pluralism and bridging. So can you tell us a little bit about your response to what's coming out from the Auditor General's report in terms of lessons learned, and also how pluralism and the work in your communities shows that?
Thank you, thank you. Well, just very quickly on some reactions to the lessons learned, I think from our own work and what we're finding in countries working with partners is really the importance of collecting data that is more holistic and generating more disaggregated data that gives you the perspective of group-based experiences as being essential to really achieving the SDGs. And one of the things, well, you know, we can look to governments to collect better data and to, you know, better distribute and improve their distribution practices of that data. One of the things we're noticing is that the need for data is being recognized by many across civil societies as well. And civil society organizations are not waiting to have better data, they're collecting it themselves. And so one of the ways in which we can all support that to happen is to look to how we can help civil society actors to do that work and to augment, and the research and policy communities. You know, we're all in this together. Private sector collects a lot of data. So it's out there. We just need to, we really need to call for that because sometimes that data is really uncomfortable for governments. It does show us who is being left behind. And often that is not something that everybody wants to see. So I think that's really my first reaction is in order to address you know, those who are being left behind and the reasons they're being left behind, we have to see that. We have to make that visible. And it's too often a tendency to sort of flatten that. And yeah, I think that would be one of our calls to action, but also one of my quick reactions to this.
Fantastic. And I was going to ask each panelist to kind of express their challenge of what for the audience to think about and maybe to bring to their questions of kind of the action to take. And I feel like maybe you've done that, but just in case I've missed anyone in terms of that, if before we jump to the audience, if anything you wanted to just kind of put out as that call to action.
I guess from my side, I will just add that maybe pointing, a good starting point would be asking yourself what specific measures you would personally advocate for to advance sustainable development for your community, your province, or the nation. I think some actions, you know, let your government know that sustainable development is important to you.
Perfect.
Can I just jump in with a
go ahead,
statistic?
another one.
You know, we're often taught that there's a divide between doing the right thing and being profitable. Today, 60% of our revenue comes from what corporate knights would define as sustainable products. So I would argue that purpose and profit are not separate things, that you can do well by doing good. And for those of you who are in the for-profit sector, it's living proof today. So it's not an either-or conversation.
It's interesting because I was on a trade delegation to the UK and the EU in June, and there were so many companies and also government representatives talking about the SDGs and ESG. So sort of that social, environmental, and governance model for business that really links to the SDGs. But there was just such an appetite, and I think that the disavowance by the Trump administration of those values has made other jurisdictions really focus more. So although it's a challenge, it's also an opportunity because it's really brought to stark contrast the work that we're doing and the opportunity and the challenge and the importance. And I think that the countries I was meeting with and the delegations were really focused on the importance of the work we're doing to be responsible and to lean in on the SDGs, and that they were looking for that in business. They were looking at that in investments. And so it is a strength. If we can articulate it powerfully, it is something we can leverage as a strength. So I'll jump. I don't know if you wanted to add anything. Go ahead. No? Okay, well, we'll jump now. What I'd like to do is take audience questions in groups of 3. So we'll take 3 at a time and we'll bring it to the panel members. And I don't know if we have a mic runner. Oh, have them. So we've got a mic down here. If you wanted to come up to the mic, and then we'll take 3 questions and then we'll go back to the audience.
Hello, thank you for the excellent panel. My name is Lindsay Boyle. I'm with the Canadian Centre for Food and Ecology. And I'm curious about something that Francis said that I just wanted to check. I wrote it down as to encourage businesses to be motivated to contribute to reconciliation. We give points on the procurement side. Could you expand on that a little bit? Just what the context of that is?
Right. I think I've only ever had 1 or 2 questions, given all the customers we have across Canada, have asked us, what are we doing for reconciliation? Given that it's a requirement of the Truth and Reconciliation Report, that's pretty sad. And sometimes just by asking the question, you spur action within the businesses that you're choosing to do business with. And there's 2 ways when you approach sustainable procurement. The one is to make it a mandatory requirement, which usually will cause some kickback, and particularly in government spending, makes the procurement people uncomfortable because they feel it will narrow the field of potential bidders on that deal. So the other way to do it is to say, well, I'm not going to make it a requirement, but if you actually can show a good answer to this, what are you doing for reconciliation, for instance, we'll give you extra points. And that rewards the vendor for doing the right thing. So did that clarify the question?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. And our government has got a lot of initiatives going on right now, in addition, in terms of loan guarantees or Indigenous business procurement initiatives that are more directly around ensuring that businesses are supported to be able to do more of this through the procurement process. Go ahead.
Hi there, it's Hilary Sampson. I'm at Royal Roads University. I just had a question for Francis as well. I was very interested in what you said about this lack of demand for collective action on the SDGs. And you might be aware of the kind of the theories and emerging research on how one of the best ways to encourage our citizenry to take duty and responsibility is to have democratic workplaces, to really deeply and broadly distribute decision-making. And that's how we build a citizenry that actually demands collective action. And I was just so curious, because you're doing such amazing work at HP, and thank you. Is HP doing anything around democratic workplaces or participation or allowing decision-making throughout the organization to really help build those citizens?
Thanks. We're going to just do 3 questions so that we can get through, so that more people will have the chance to speak rather than one, because otherwise we'll have a very short question period. So thank you for your question. I'll take 2 more.
Hello, my name is Meninjeri Karanja, and I have a question for Vanessa. And this is connected to Canada's responsibility as a global citizen and leader. There have been reports of Canadian companies involved in unsustainable extractive mining practices in Africa. These have led to disruption of local communities, impacting the health and environment of people there. What is the commissioner's role in monitoring, reporting, and demanding that these companies commit to values aligned to SDGs, as well as Canada's own commitments to SDGs?
Thank you. And we'll jump to the other mic, I think. Go ahead.
Merci, thank you. My name is Cindy Allen. I'm a Welede Yellowknives Clinchon person with settler ancestry. I'm a Treaty 8 person, grateful resident visitor working here in Victoria at the Victoria Native Friendship Center as a language helper, and I'm supporting some elders today and at the conference. I just wanted to give an example as an Indigenous person who has some leadership roles and experience in my community. So I'm a Northerner. And years ago, so I was on the Gwich'in Renewable Resource Board, and as the board of director, I really took it to heart, the sustainable development goals. And so I pushed the Renewable Resource Board to include those considerations in how we generate wealth. So the Gwich'in Renewable Resource Board is a land claim board that's set up to manage the Gwich'in settlement area, renewable resources. And so we have a big pot of, there was money that's given under the land claim, and interest is made on that money for the projects that the Gwich'in want to do in their communities. And so it took 2 years, but I convinced the board to, when we invest our money, that we invested in sustainable projects, so that the money that we took, that we asked our bank and our investors to not invest in extractive industries as like oil and gas and those kind of things, because as a Gwich'in Renewable Resource Board, we're there to protect the environment for the future. So I did not want any of our income to be harming any other Indigenous people's lands or rights. And so it took a couple years of convincing, but we can invest in other projects. We can invest our money and get that income from other projects that we can hold our head up high and say we did not impact someone else's land and resources or Indigenous rights. So I encourage everybody to do that. You can look for other projects that are not extractive, that are not harmful on Indigenous people and communities. There's lots of examples now. 15 years ago, when I was pushing this, it was a challenge. It took 2 years. Hopefully you come to a conference like this and it takes you one talk to say, yes, I can do it. So thank you, Masicho.
Thank you so much. All right. I'll let the panel jump in. You want to start?
I'll jump in on the distributed leadership one. And I think I can see Caro standing there. So I'm going to talk about purpose-driven businesses. The reason I still work at HP is when you're in a purpose-driven organization, it makes these kinds of decisions a lot easier. You still have to come up with good business justification, but you're not spending a lot of time convincing people if you have the business case for it too. The other thing in a tech company, it's a pretty innovative environment. So we have this idea of fail fast and a pretty flat management system. So I think it's probably not what the questioner was asking specifically, but I just think the way the tech industry works, because it's such a fast-paced industry, you don't have time for much hierarchy in an organization at the best of times. And then if you layer on purpose on top of that, it really helps smooth things along.
Thank you. And if you wanted to comment next, Jane, on the mining or at all, or there was a question about mining and kind of social license and in outside for Canadian mining companies outside of Canada.
I liked the comment because it's
Okay.
really about investing for value and values, right? And it comes back to that procurement conversation, right? Where are you putting your money? And the reason why sustainable or circular procurement is such a good thing is because you're already spending the money. You're just tweaking how you spend it. You're not having to build whole new departments, 5 years, remember. You can just tweak what you're doing and have so much more impact with it.
Wanna add?
Oh, I think one of the questions was for me as well. I will just point out that for our office, we do have to stick to what's under federal responsibility. So sometimes mining, for example, I think that was the question, is not under, largely under federal jurisdiction. So that's not something we would be able to audit, but we did actually put out a report in 2024 on contaminated sites in the north. So sometimes there are ways for us to go there. But again, our office, when we're planning our audits, we do make sure we're considering the SDGs. So I'll just stop there.
Okay, thanks so much. We can, if anybody else want to add, or should we jump to the next set of questions? Okay, we'll jump to, we'll take 3 more and then we'll have to end the session because we're running a little bit tight on time. Go ahead. And please do keep your questions short.
Yes, my name is Coral Stramberg. I'm the chair of the Canadian Purpose Economy Project. Just a quick follow on to Francis's point about procurement. What we have found is that organizations actually don't know the purpose of their suppliers. And an easy fix in procurement would be to actually ask, what is the purpose of your business? And I think that would drive progress on the SDGs. But my question is for Vanessa, and I'm pleased to be an advisor on the advisory panel of the Commissioner of Sustainable Development. And I can say for the fact that SDGs are considered in all the Auditor General's reviews, so that's fantastic. But my question is around environmental petitions, because I think that they can be very instrumental in driving change. I'm just wondering if you could speak about that process.
Okay, go ahead. Yeah. We got someone at this mic? Okay, go ahead.
Make sure I don't lose the mic. My name is Justin Rock. I'm a student and advocate as well. My question is broadly for the entire panel. One of the issues that we've been facing is politicians that don't have the political will to actually cause change and actually follow through with objectives that will cause social good. Good example of this, unfortunately, is within this province of BC. Canada's country signed on to the UN Convention for Rights of Peoples with Disabilities. One of the main points of contention on that, and one of the black marks on this country, is the draconian laws in BC, specifically around the Mental Health Act. This has been pointed to for over 10 years as a gross human rights violation. Rather than addressing this issue that the province has, well, Premier Eby has acknowledged his awareness of, they've been fighting in court for almost a decade to try to maintain this draconian law the United Nations has said needs to be struck. So how do we encourage our leaders to have the, I hate to say spine, to actually look at their legislation, their policies, and see what changes need to be made to better the public, not their next election, not getting back into power, but actually serving the public and making sure they're receiving the services they need.
Thank you. And our last question.
Thanks, Mr. Gibson. My name is Kyle Embringham. I'm the co-executive director of the Starfish Canada, and we help young people become climate resilient leaders. And I think through a lot of what I've heard each of you express today is that this is a question of leadership more than anything else. And so I would love to hear what sort of leadership skills you think young people need in order to be able to tackle sort of the situation that we find ourselves in today. Thank you.
Thank you so much. All right, who wants to start?
Okay, let me jump in on how do we get politicians who do more of what we want them to do? Well, we have to go talk to them, right? there's a lot of people don't feel comfortable going and talking to politicians. And so you just need to go and do it. And don't assume that they know any more than the average person. I mean, there's a lot of Canadians who still don't even know that plastic is made from oil. I mean, like the level of environmental literacy is pretty low. I'm vice chair of the board for Learning for a Sustainable Future, trying to reorient teaching and learning in the K-12 space. We just issued a report on climate literacy. You should go and have a look at it. So your politicians probably need a little bit of educating too. And I think there's a lot of academics in the room too, so we all have that role in educating. And it comes down to our starfish friend here too. Because of that 5-year thing, and really it's every gram of carbon today, tomorrow, blah, 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 is helping young people step into those leadership roles without feeling they need permission to do it. I really, it's what we do in the next 5 years will literally resonate for thousands of years on this planet. So we don't have time to build people into the perfect leader. We just have to get out and do it.
Absolutely. Jane, I wanted to jump to you because you haven't had a chance for a bit.
Yeah, thank you. And, I'd like to echo a little bit of what has already been said, in terms of leadership, though, taking difficult decisions and changing policy, that's long and hard work. But even when we do have solid policies or a new piece of legislation that is meant to drive or address a particular exclusion for a group, for instance, it might not be implemented. And why isn't it implemented? Because we really don't have that kind of will within the broader society to do so. So, education, advocacy, we all have a role to play. And if we take a step back and wait for things to be led by government, we'll be waiting for a long time. I mean, as you're saying, government needs to hear, but we also need to actually educate ourselves and ensure that we're really understanding who is being left behind, how, and what needs to be done about it. I think there is some really particularly important ways in terms of values that Canadians tend to hold that is quite special and unique in the world. We tend to listen. We tend to bring in a much broader perspective of actors across our societies because we've had to do that hard work for a very long time. And there's a real opportunity for Canada and Canadians now to step into a much more sort of leadership role, I would say, in acting as a convener to help to share the experiences and the failures we've all had in our own societies. But this is important work, and it's I think something that Canada can take forward together.
Thank you. Go ahead.
And I will jump in a little bit on this with an action you can take, and it's going to answer Coro's question as well. So Coro asked me to talk a bit more about the environmental petitions process at the Office of the Auditor General. One of the Commissioner of the Environment's roles is over the environmental petitions process. And this process, any Canadian can write in on an environment or sustainable development topic, and you can ask questions of your government through this, and you're guaranteed a response from a minister. It doesn't have to be a big, long list of names for this petition. Even one person, an organization, anyone can write into our office through that process. And it's a really great way to let the government know that what's important to you and that sustainable development is important.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Can I jump in with one more for our starfish friend? Took me quite a long time to learn this, and it was through some work that HP was doing, but you don't need to be an expert in everything to be able to stand up and make your voice heard and step into a leadership role. And if you wait, back to that same conversation, you'll never be. Sustainability is such a big topic today. You can't possibly know everything about everything. So just giving those young leaders the courage and saying you don't need to know everything, hopefully will help them step up.
Thank you so much. Thank you to the folks that raised those really important questions. I hope that the folks that didn't get a chance at the mic this round will be able to speak in other sessions, because I know that this is a conversation we'll be having all day today and tomorrow. And I'll get the panelists to wrap up with a quick few final comments about what out of this session you think would be important for the audience to take away on moving the dial in the next 5 years. And just as kind of a wrap up and take to the next session, final comments. You want to start?
Oh, sure.
I think, wow, we're all seeing that there is so much appetite, I think, in Canada and around the world for work that fosters pluralism and encourages communities and groups to talk to one another, to engage, to build bridges, to hold the tools for civil discourse. We're hearing a lot about uncivil discourse and how polarized we are and how divided we are. Sometimes maybe, but actually we as Canadians, I think we also hold the ability and the habit of listening to one another. Pluralism is an approach, but also a methodology in a sense for how societies can respond and treat its differences. It's a very Canadian approach to collaborating both within Canada and globally. We're seen as ourselves and globally as a leader in building strong multicultural communities. And yes, we have a lot of work still to do. We've made a lot of mistakes and we continue to make mistakes. But there is an opportunity for Canada to step up in this regard on the global stage. It is our hope that at the Global Center for Pluralism, our tools and research will continue to contribute a body of evidence for those who are interested in partnering with us and doing this work, to both deepen the knowledge base on effective approaches to advancing pluralism, as well as to inform the work of Canadians and our global partners. And just a quick plug, we have some, if you are interested in hearing a bit more about our monitor report and our work, we have cards with QR codes to all the reports. And so please come see me or my colleague, Michael Uesch, who's also here at the forum.
Thank you so much.
So I'm going to come back to fix your own house first. And particularly for the academics in the room, one of the things that really frustrates me is you might be teaching sustainability or elements of it, but you're not walking the talk. And I don't just mean in procurement. If we expect our young people to understand what true sustainability is like, we have to model it too. We can't just academically talk about it. And I talk to way too many academics who don't think it's their job to start implementing things in their own organization. So I'd really, and that's true in business too. Like most people wouldn't know what a sustainable company was if it hit them over the head, because we actually don't have any, right? We don't have any truly sustainable organizations. One of the things I implemented at HP is I train every single new hire that comes into my organization from janitor to CEO so that I can level set. And it's a 2-hour live training, which is a lot of work on my part, but it pays off in droves because now they all understand it's their job, you know, how here are the goals, blah, blah, blah. So, you know, walking the talk as much as you possibly can and teaching as much as you can to everybody who will listen.
Thank you. And Vanessa.
And I think for me, one of the key messages in our report is, achieving sustainable development is going to require deep societal transformation. As a country, we need to move from good intentions to effective implementation that's integrated, that's grounded in partnership, including with Indigenous people, that's driven by data, and it's accountable to future generations.
Thank you so much. In this moment, I liken it to, if you're sitting there on the rug under you is perfectly stable and there's a little shake, you really feel it. But when the whole thing is shaking a lot, if you add another little shake, you don't feel it as much. And this is a moment where the rug's really shaking under us all right now in terms of the shifting geopolitics and how rules are changing. It is a moment also where we can make changes at the local level, in local governments, in provincial governments, and internationally and nationally, where we can try new things and we can take a bit more risk because everybody feels that sense of urgency. And there's more moment right now, it feels, and I'm in government, so I can say it feels like there's a moment where we can try things that we felt were too risky. And so it's a real opportunity. I encourage you to take up the gauntlet of everybody is an actor, everybody has agency, to take those steps, to try new things, to engage and pilot new initiatives and walk the talk, and continue to bridge across difference and to follow the data and make sure that we're speaking to the gap we need to close. So thank you so much for participating. I want to thank our panel members. It's been a real privilege to be part of this powerhouse panel today. And, speaking to the SDGs and all-women panel opening this morning is fantastic. So thank you so much for participating and thank you for your comments.
Thank you so much, Diana, and the panel. And let's take a 20-minute break in the sunshine by the trees on the campus. And we'll be back with Peter Singer and his panel dealing with climate and health and Canada's role. And in the question on politics and politicians, we have 15 politicians in the room. Talk to them. Thank you. Thanks very much. Well, it's still morning time. As my son would say back in London, way back when he was a little child, I worked for CTV in those days as a foreign correspondent. And he was born in London, and he would say, in an English accent, he would say, "Daddy, it's morning time." And so it's still morning time. I'll introduce the panel, but we've been having all of these discussions here in this format, but I think some of the most important discussions that we've been having is with each other just moments ago. You're meeting new people, you're hearing new ideas, and you're discovering what this country is all about and what the world is all about. And the reason why I say that, I just met a woman from Shawinigan named Indira Moody. And we never met, but we talked about a bunch of things. And she said Shawinigan. And I said, well, I worked for Prime Minister Jean Chrétien for 2 years. And as Mr. Chrétien would say to me, he would say, "Jimmy, you've been around since a long time." And so being around since a long time, we talked about her company and about protein and animal protein and what she's doing there and her journey from different parts of the world to be in Shawinigan. So I just find that the conversations that take place with each other are equally as important as what we hear today. With that, though, I would like to introduce Peter Singer, and Peter was the former executive director of the Canadian Association of Physicians for the Environment, and this plenary will deal with climate and health and Canada's role. Peter.
Well, thanks very much. How's everyone doing? Good. So we're going to spend about an hour together talking about climate and health. My name's Peter Singer. I'm not the former executive director of the Canadian Association for Physicians and Environment, but Courtney had so many titles that some of them spilled over onto my thing. In fact, I rented out the space below my name to Courtney for her excess titles because she had so many of them. I'll introduce this great panel as we get into them with conversation, but just a couple of quick framing remarks. I'm a professor emeritus at University of Toronto. I was Dr. Tedros' special advisor at WHO and did a few other things, and it's really great to be here. Mostly I'm Stephen Huttert's mentee, which is the key issue here. But when we think about the continuity between what we just heard, the overarching theme, and what we're about to talk about, I'd like to pick up on a couple of threads, pull on a couple of threads just by way of framing. Our topic today is climate and health. More than anything, we want to focus on specific solutions. So the through line of this is going to be some comments, some asks from the panel to you, hopefully some offers or commitments from you related to those asks, and then some acceptance to try and make this a platform for action. It also resonates with one of those lessons from that Auditor General report on integrated SDG solutions, climate and health together. We're going to explore the intersection. And finally, where we can, we'll get into the CanCon and any special role for Canada and comparative advantage. Any questions before we start? Does that sound okay? All right. So let me just start by saying that what we probably want to do is pin down a little bit first what we mean by climate and health, because when you say things like that, people's eyes glaze over. So what does that really mean? Well, thankfully, actually, just a little digression. Anyone see Annie Hall? You know that part where Woody Allen pulls Marshall McLuhan out from behind the billboard and said, well, actually, you know, I have Mr. McLuhan here and he can talk about his own theory. Well, Kevin Lin just finished a PhD, or a DRPH, a Doctor of Public Health, at the Harvard School of Public Health on what is climate and health. And so what a great place to start with that. So Kevin, and I'll introduce the other folks as we go. So Kevin, what is climate and health?
Yeah, thank you, Peter. I'll give it a try. But so in 2023, climate change and health was rising as a prominent global health priority while I was completing a research fellowship for my dissertation at Gates Ventures. It was during this time that COP28 was occurring and health was being featured prominently, as well as the WHO was including climate change as a key priority within its general program of work. However, despite this emerging priority, there was really confusion amongst organizations on how to respond. So for example, when just asked, how does climate change impact health? It often resulted in these long-winded answers really that reflected the complexity of the challenge, but didn't provide any conceptual clarity, especially for decision makers looking to support with strategic investments. So one of the questions we embarked on to answer was, you know, what are the most prominent pathways in which climate change impacts health from an organizational management perspective? And what's the burden of disease associated with these pathways? And we ultimately came up with 7 pathways based on the literature. And I won't go into describing all of them because we will talk about them at some point on this panel, but I'll just list them here. The first one is pathogens and vectors, and just the role of climate change altering the behavior, physiology, and life course of vectors and pathogens across the world. The second is extreme heat. It can lead to increased morbidity and mortality from an array of chronic diseases, including mental health and adverse pregnancy outcomes. And I mentioned this one and describe it because this is a pathway that we have felt here, and I think of 4 years ago during the heat dome, which resulted in 619 deaths. Others include water insecurity and food insecurity, pathways particularly relevant for low and middle income countries. Air pollution, another pathway that is very much experienced by Canadians, it seems like, every summer now. Particulate matter from the burning of fossil fuels and forest fires enter the body and cause damage, increasing morbidity and mortality, especially cardiovascular and respiratory disease. The fifth, or another one, is mental health, separate from heat, extreme heat, but specifically from forest displacement. Another pathway we seem to be experiencing here as people flee from wildfires, people losing their connections to social supports, resulting in anxiety, depression, and PTSD. That's well reflected in the literature. And then the last one that we described was health systems that we'll also talk about up here. But really, out of those 7 pathways, there's only one where there is a quantified global estimate of disease burden that has been modeled, and that's for air pollution. And so, you know, ask that question, you know, how do we prioritize investments of scarce health and development dollars when we don't know the number of people dying or the people being impacted at a global scale? And so we must do something, though. And as I mentioned, you know, we are feeling these pathways now. We're feeling them here locally in Canada, but we're also feeling them globally. And so what we did is we took these pathways and we combined them with solutions and metrics based on SDGs to develop a framework to support organizations and governments who are taking up the challenge of climate change and health.
That's terrific, Kevin. Thank you. So that takes us down one level of granularity. There's kind of 6 pathways, 6 for instances. And then we want to move more towards very concrete solutions. And Carly Silva, you're the CEO of Grand Challenges Canada. Grand Challenges Canada is probably one of Canada's largest and most successful impact investment funds that nobody's ever heard of. Raise your hands if you've heard of it. Okay, well, actually, you have heard of it. That's great. I'm kind of biased. I love the thing. But Carly, you have been supporting solutions, funding solutions in climate and health, and now you're about to launch a Grand Challenge in climate and health, or a climate and health challenge. And so this is very exciting. This is like a premiere. This is the pre-launch, the Canadian pre-launch of the Climate and Health Challenge. So tell us about that, and if you want, tell us a little bit about Grand Challenges Canada.
Yeah, thanks, Peter. And for when people go Google, the punchline is that we can all thank Peter for starting Grand Challenges Canada. But it's been my privilege to work there. We're essentially a mission-oriented innovation platform, and we focus on grand challenges. It's in the name. What's a grand challenge? That's a critical barrier for us to health and social equity, that if you can target it with innovation, and overcome that you're actually going to further advance what the world looks like. Make tomorrow a better day than today. And don't we all want to do that? Interestingly, in these times, I've been reflecting a lot as fellow Canadians. We're bombarded by this moment that we're in a crisis, it's looming, there's things happening. The last time I think we really had those messages globally was in 2008 in the financial crisis, and that's exactly when Grand Challenges Canada was launched. And so kind of out of a crisis and very fit for emerging times is our platform. And when we launch Grand Challenges, we really look to increase the awareness of a certain issue, a certain critical barrier, and try to attract solvers to that idea. Who has brilliant ideas that maybe didn't see themselves in that yet? And to once we fund them, we help manage the risk that helps to make innovation a really tough sell for some institutions, some people. Many, I think, will probably hear a lot today about how Canada can be a bit risk averse in its investment approach. So think of it as a de-risking platform so that by the time a solution comes out the other side of our support, funding, and technical support, that they are something that even a lower risk investor might be interested in. And we do this all to have sustainable impact. Our current goal is to reach 750 million people globally with life-saving and life-improving innovation by 2035. And as Kevin started illuminating here, climate and health is one of the big challenges at the moment. So we'd be remiss to not do some work focusing in on it. But also, as he said, it's a big area. And so before we have all the granular data that we think we might need in order to really prioritize all of these, what we thought and what we often do when we define grand challenges is to dive into listening locally. Listen to what people are actually feeling is a reality. Many communities know exactly how climate change is impacting them. We have done the largest global survey of frontline health workers in the world, over 6,400 respondents in 107 countries. And they were able to tell us very specifically what they feel climate change does to their communities, but also how it shows up in the health system. And interestingly, we've seen that these impacts, and they map very beautifully onto Kevin's framework, they're regionally specific, as you might imagine. We see some things focus much more on pathogens and vector-borne diseases and that changing of migration in some parts of the world, and other parts of the world are much more focused on the effects on chronic and non-communicable diseases. And so those results are coming out. That was one thing I was not allowed to share because it's under a publication ban. But stay tuned, it'll be coming out in Lancet Global Health later this year so that you can see where globally frontline healthcare workers are prioritizing the need for action. We've also done one call for proposals. We got, in a very short period of time, 800 applications from 80 different countries. We've funded a number of those, about $6 million to date, and just gives us a taste of who's out there, what's being pursued. So things like using solar power to harvest mayflies for food year-round in Burkina Faso, introducing portable ultrasound to detect dengue early as it spreads to remote areas of Peru, or an app that supports mental health needs of communities in coastal Bangladesh who are vulnerable to funding or to flooding. So these survey results and the results from many different points of input, expert panels, communities, et cetera, are shaping a new climate and health innovation program. The thematic areas we're seeing is about 5 out of the 7 kind of key ones that Kevin has put forward. We're going to see infectious diseases, climate resilient food systems, and chronic diseases all featuring in what we're most interested in out of this grand challenge. And we're going to launch early in 2026 with about $50 million, but we're looking for $150 million over the 5 years. That's our ambition. We think that's a way to get this whole innovation ecosystem going. And we're looking for people who are interested in that, but also for people in this room really interested in those who have solutions and are interested in exploring those further and scaling them, and stay tuned for that.
Great, thank you, Carly. So let's give it up for Carly and Kevin just to keep some momentum going here. All right, so now Martin is going to take us down even further. So this Funding Solutions, Martin's going to take us down even further into one example of a large-scale solution in the vectors category that he's been working on. And Martin, you're the CEO of Malaria No More. You're also doing something called Billion Scale, and you're interested in scale. You've got a very specific thing to talk about on dengue fever and Wolbachia, and you'll say more about that. And there's 2 angles to what Martin's about to say. One is it's a really exciting, specific example with very high impact. Secondly, the financial model and the capital stack behind the example is very useful and applicable to other applications. And I know here a lot of folks are focused on impact investing, capital stack, et cetera. Martin's actually assembling a capital stack of different types of finance behind this specific example. So Martin, do you want to just talk a little bit about the example, but also about the financing behind it?
Happy to. Thanks, Peter. Thanks for organizing this panel. Thanks to the organizers of the Victoria Forum. I'm not a Canadian, as you can tell from my accent. I am a Cascadian. I grew up in the shadow of Mount Rainier in Washington State, so took the Clipper up yesterday. So great to be here. I'm also grateful, Peter, for you sitting me and Carly together. Carly's an investor in our Transform Health Fund, so it's nice to be on the love seat with you, Carly. So, as Kevin talked about the pathways, I think it's worth anchoring in a moment that I think was a watershed moment in climate and health, and that was the flooding in Pakistan 3 years ago this summer. So people saw it in news reports. It was apocalyptic. It was a moment where 30% of the country's landmass was underwater. 33 million people were impacted or displaced by that flooding. And while most of the news reports focused on kind of the kinetic event of the flooding, the public health emergency was actually equally or even more disastrous that unfolded in the weeks afterward. So 2, 3, 4, 6 weeks after, we saw a 5-fold increase in malaria cases in Pakistan, a 10-fold increase in dengue cases. We saw 99,000 cases of cholera in one day in one district, cholera being a waterborne disease associated with flooding. And so it was really the moment that the world woke up to climate as a health threat, I think. As that example illustrates, a warming world is a playground for mosquito-borne disease, for mosquitoes and the diseases they carry, like malaria, dengue, chikungunya has been in the news recently, yellow fever, Zika, et cetera. And, broadly, there are 3 reasons for that. One, you have flooding events that disrupt health services and cause these endemic diseases to explode. I met with the Minister of Health of Pakistan recently. They're still struggling 3 years later to get back to their kind of baseline levels on malaria and dengue because of the flooding and what it did to hospitals and the health system. The second way that it impacts mosquito-borne disease is it extends the rainy season. It used to be that there was a monsoon season and an off season for mosquito-borne disease. Now they're pretty much year-round in a lot of places. And then lastly, the mosquitoes are going on vacation. They're expanding to new latitudes and new altitudes, bringing these diseases to otherwise naive populations. And so the numbers are mind-boggling. Dengue, the WHO estimates there are about 400 million cases per year. That's grown tenfold in just the last 7 years. The Lancet says that we could see an additional 4 billion people at risk of mosquito-borne disease by 2070, given the trajectory that we're on. So we're seeing massive, the scope of this challenge is really growing. As Peter knows, I never want to talk about scope without hope. And the good news is there's real hope here as well. We're in what I think will be a golden era of innovations like the ones Carly mentioned that can help us address the worsening problem of mosquito-borne disease. So we're seeing sometimes AI-driven early warning and response systems. We're seeing new therapies and vaccines. But one category of solution that I'm especially excited about is mosquito solutions. I've worked on malaria for 20 years. Mosquitoes are always the bad guys. They're always the villains of the story. And I think we may be at a tipping point where they actually become the solution to how we solve these problems. And so the example I want to give is around dengue, and it's a naturally occurring bacteria called Wolbachia. It's a mouthful. Happy to spell it out if it's useful, so you can do more research. When I was telling Courtney backstage about this, she said, oh, so it's kind of a planetary health solution. And I hadn't really thought about it in those terms, but I think it really is. So this is a naturally occurring bacteria that affects about 50% of insects anyway. But when it's applied to the Aedes aegypti mosquito, you get this contest in the gut of the mosquito between this bacteria, Wolbachia, and the viruses that we know as dengue and Zika and yellow fever and chikungunya. And the bacteria wins. It actually prevents the onward transmission of this disease. So over the last 15 years, we've seen this go from an experiment to a deeply documented success story. In places like Yogyakarta, Indonesia, they did a randomized control trial that showed 77% declines in dengue rates, 86% declines in hospitalizations due to dengue when you were able to establish Wolbachia in the wild mosquito population. And as best we can tell, this is a one-time intervention, one and done. So 15 years ago, when they did it in Australia, they saw huge declines. It has not come back. So really elegant, really exciting solution. The challenge we face now is how do we take this planetary health solution and scale it? How do we do that with financing? How do we do it with product innovation, et cetera? The WHO's target product profile for Wolbachia says that this should reach at least 1 billion people globally. The challenge, one of the challenges, is its cost between $20 and $50 per person protected to date. That's a lot of money, particularly in this climate, this financing environment that we're in. So we've been working with the suppliers, we've been working with countries, we've been working with the WHO and other partners. We think we can get this down to about $3 per person protected. So we're turning a $50 billion problem around a really elegant climate and health solution into a $3 billion problem. And the first place we're looking to do that is in Indonesia. As I mentioned, Indonesia did the randomized control trial. I'm just back from Jakarta 3 weeks ago, where the Minister of Health signed off on a plan that we call the 100-100 plan. The goal is to scale Wolbachia to 100 cities, 110 million people protected in the next 6 years. The total cost of the plan, just to get nerdy and capital stack for a minute, is about $390 million, so call it $400 million, against immediate benefits within that 6-7 year period of $3.9 billion in direct health savings and preventing missed work. So 10x ROI on this intervention. And what we've been able to do is work with the Asian Development Bank to position some highly concessional loans for the country, to work with municipal governments and the government of Indonesia to get about 10–12% of the costs covered in the annual municipal budgets, to mobilize private investment to build the world's largest factory for creating Wolbachia-infected mosquito eggs. It's about a $25 million cost and will be, drive revenue and jobs and so forth in Indonesia. But the key to all of this, and Carly alluded to this, is that catalytic grant capital, that de-risking capital. And, we're in a moment when we're seeing real declines in donor aid. I do a lot of work with U.S. government, and everyone's aware of the pressures there. President Trump's budget would have caused about a 65% decline in foreign assistance for health from the U.S. government being the biggest grant financer of health interventions around the world. So we're in a moment where we can't stretch aid dollars any further. We need to multiply them. And the way you multiply them is by bringing them into conversation and coordination with the other kinds of capital that we talked about. So we think we need about $40 million in grant capital to unlock $400 million in concessional debt investment and on-budget government spending for this project. And the good news is we think we can get half of that concessional capital in Indonesia. So we met with, and we're developing a partnership with the Indonesia Business Council, the 35 biggest companies and philanthropies in Indonesia, and they want to step up and cover about half of that need locally. So what this creates is, we really need about 5% of the budget in global grant capital to make this happen. That's a pretty compelling leverage story.
It's a great example, Martin, and I'm going to start asking for what you want from these people as we go along, and then I'll backtrack. What's your one single ask to these folks when we go to them in a second?
Come back to me.
Okay, Robin, go ahead. Robin Speedy is the senior consultant. Thank you, Martin. Let's give it up for Martin. Great example. Very great, very detailed. Robin Speedy is a senior consultant in sustainability and preparedness at Fraser Health. So going from an Indonesian example to an example right here in BC. And Robin, you're going to give us a couple of very concrete examples of climate and health and how a regional health authority pursues those examples. So please go ahead.
For sure. Thank you, Peter. Hi, everyone. So maybe you're wondering, kind of to start off, why do health systems need leads on sustainability and preparedness or planetary health? And the reason is that we are actually big contributors to the problem. So globally, we produce about 5% of total emissions. And if you were to add up all of the health systems as a country, we would be the world's 5th largest emitter. So there's actually a huge imperative for us to be reducing our negative impact on the environment and taking those actions. And there's immediate implications as well for us in terms of health system demand and operations, because as my fellow panelists have shared, climate change and environmental degradation are making us sick. And so one of the best things that we can do actually for sustainable healthcare is keep people healthy in the first place. That helps us to manage our own carbon footprint, and it also helps to manage stress on the system. Things like wait times, right, which we hear about all the time in the news. So we have a strategy at Fraser Health that I'll share a couple examples from, but I just want to recognize that we are not the only ones doing this. All of the health authorities in the province are similarly working in this same direction. We have learned so much from Courtney and leadership in the Northwest Territories and with the Power Initiative. So there is a national, global, provincial, hyper-local movement around this, and we are all rowing in that same direction. So a couple of examples of specific projects to make this concrete. So one of them is around anesthetic gases, so commonly used in surgical procedures, and some have large environmental footprints. And we know that safe alternatives do exist, and some of them are actually a lot less expensive as well. So as a publicly funded system in healthcare, we have a responsibility to be making good decisions around this, not just from an environmental perspective, but also from a financial one. So desflurane is the first one I'll talk about, and I think Courtney's going to elaborate on that one too. But 2,500 times more potent than carbon dioxide in terms of its global warming potential. So this is something that there's a national movement around, a global movement around eliminating it, because we have clinically appropriate alternatives that we can use. So some medical schools are actually not teaching about it anymore. And this is a chance for us to make better decisions and really not have a negative impact on patients. So we're very proud at Fraser Health to have completely phased out desflurane in the spring of this year, and we're joining 100+ other hospitals in the country that are moving in that direction. Another one, nitrous oxide, commonly known as laughing gas. We use it mostly in maternity. It's about 260 times more potent than carbon dioxide. It's a significant ozone depleting substance. It stays in the atmosphere for more than 100 years. And what's interesting about nitrous is that a lot of our infrastructure in Canada, our hospitals, have piped-in systems of nitrous oxide. And those systems have been shown to have a lot of leakage, up to 97% in some cases. So that's obviously a problem from an environmental standpoint in terms of the release of that gas into the atmosphere, but also thinking about, again, the cost implications of that and the implications for our staff, because they shouldn't be inhaling that. So what we're doing is we're switching from those piped-in systems to deactivate them and have a portable supply of nitrous oxide, and that keeps the gas much more contained. So it allows us to have that protection for our staff and reduce that waste. These are examples of where I like to see a lot of overlap in that Venn diagram in terms of the win-win-win benefits for a health system, for patients, for staff, and for the environment. And we're focusing on initiatives with as many of those co-benefits as we can.
That's amazing. Thank you so much, Robin. And if there's one thing you could ask these folks for, what's your ask? I'm going to try and do them together and then backtrack.
Yeah, I mean, I think I would really just encourage you to use your influence. I think there's so much expertise and skills, a diversity of knowledge in this room. You know, where do you have those leverage points that you can tap into within your own spheres? And really just remembering and grounding yourself in the understanding that we are not separate from nature. We are nature. And so if you care about human health, we need to be caring about climate, and we need to be investing in these kinds of solutions.
Great. Thank you. And those were great examples. And if I might add, maybe even ask your local hospital whether they're using desflurane or nitrous. So Courtney Howard, I mean, she's got so many titles, they spilled over. The chair of the Global Climate and Health Alliance, founder of Power. You're doing a parallel session later, so you want to set that up. You have this national initiative, Power, and what I love about it is it's got a specific example, which is the desflurane, and you could say a few things about that, and then a broader mobilizing thing. So just tell us a little bit about that. Tell us a little bit about your session and give the one ask you want for the audience, and then we want to go to the questions when we pick up 3 more asks.
Sure. So I'm so excited to be here in the plenary. What wonderful presentations. It's really interesting to learn what's happening in different parts of the space. So I'm an emergency physician. I live in Yellowknives Dene territory on permafrost. I serve an area that is about 20% of the Canadian landmass, larger than France and Spain combined. So we have 1 CT scanner in the middle of the north of Canada, and that's it. In 2023, as many people know, our entire 100-bed subarctic hospital needed to get evacuated due to wildfires. And so it was generous health professionals in BC and Alberta and people also in Manitoba that helped us do that. So my patients ended up largely at St. Paul's Hospital, and actually I think some people from Fraser Health also received them. So you can see that we are already having massive health and health systems impacts from climate change. I'm now the president, it's not up there, of the Medical Association in the North, and I can tell you that 2 years out, it is not easier to keep an emergency department open when you are working with a population and physicians who had to evacuate an entire territory with no plan on about 3 days' notice. So we know from the Auditor General's report that came out in June that that's actually just what we should expect based on what we've currently built. We were late to creating a national adaptation strategy. We have not invested adequately in it. I was actually part of the disaster and risk reduction table. I thought we did a pretty good job, but it was difficult to coordinate and For instance, wildfire smoke isn't even taken into account in our national adaptation strategy. And so we're deeply, deeply unprepared, and the Earth system is changing faster than we thought it was going to. So I'm lucky to work at local, national, and international levels. So with my international hat on, I'm the chair of the Global Climate and Health Alliance. We're the world's biggest convener of the health sector in this space. We have 215 member organizations. We've done things like help to organize the COP26 health program, collegiality with the WHO and Healthcare Without Harm. So we basically showed up for COP26 thinking we were going to get maybe 9 countries to sign on to have climate resilient, sustainable, low carbon health systems. And I'm going to mention this because I think the tactics are important. We had early movers, the UK, we had a deadline, the US signed up halfway through, and essentially we had healthy competition create a race to the top, where we ended up, we popped out of COP26 with 52 countries having signed on. And so that, yeah. So when you think about the potential for that, we're responsible for 5% of emissions. We have 40 million healthcare professionals who each of them are a trusted professional in their community. And we allocate together 10% of global world product. So I'm now working with the International Tipping Points group, Tim Lenton and his group out of Exeter. They're very interested because we're amongst the most powerful and well-organized centers in the world. They think that there's probably no one who has a better chance of creating a new narrative and actual socio-political economic tipping points in service of a healthy planet. And so having done that internationally, that has made it way easier to get things done in Canada. So we, in fact, ran a very similar program to get all of the medical schools signed on to mainstream planetary health. It was a declaration on planetary health, same set of tactics. Yes or no question, deadline, had to announce it at an international conference. Once the dean started seeing that other deans were signing up, they all signed up. Popped out the end of that with basically national consensus amongst medical schools and now a roadmap for implementation. And so, thank you. Yes, we tried a lot of other things first that didn't work. Like this is 15 years into this effort. And so what that's really taught me is we're all very much part of a complex adaptive system, from the local to the national to the international, and what happens at each level really matters. And so what Power is now doing is we are working to accelerate the ground game. I led the roadmap, and so I interviewed all sorts of people for the implementation, and people said, look, I really care, but as the frontline health professional, I don't really know what I'm doing, and the curriculum surveys would support that. We've established that. And I need supportive structures to help me in the 5 minutes I have available at the bedside or the hour I have on a Sunday to do the work. And so what we're now doing is tomorrow's session is about helping them to do what what Fraser Health has already done, which is create a community-facing strategic plan, because the opportunity here is if the health system becomes an anchor institution of sustainability, that allows the trusted voices of healthcare professionals, as they start to understand this in a learning by doing frame, to lend voice to decarbonizing our electricity supply, to local sustainable food, to the local transport. And so my ask for you tomorrow is to come to our session at 3:15, because what we're hoping from this audience is for you to tell us how you want us to do that well. Sometimes doctors, we can be a little egotistical, we can be a bit uppity, we could do this wrong. And so we're gonna have questions for you like, who should be in the room? How long is this gonna take? What are the best ways for us to do this? What do you think the major opportunities are? Where could you see this going off the rails? We're gonna film the whole thing with a GoPro, because I think this stuff's exciting. And we're gonna make a video that we'll then use to help train other people. So please, I know there's so much wisdom in this audience, please come to our presentation tomorrow.
Great. So far we've got come to a presentation, be a natural leader, and ask about desflurane and nitrous while you're at it in your local hospital. Martin, what's your one sentence ask for the audience?
I feel like I've spent a lot of time drawing a capital stack in the air, and so I don't want to have a technical ask, though there is a big leverage opportunity for the Government of Canada and partners here. I guess what I would ask is, I think we're in a moment where we need a mindset shift. I was on a hike last week, and I was thinking about There's a quote by Arthur C. Clarke, the sci-fi writer. Any sci-fi fans out there? He says, sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. And I was playing with the inverse of that. A sufficiently advanced magic is indistinguishable from technology. And the solution I just described is nature magic, right? It is a naturally occurring bacteria defeating the virus in a mosquito so humans don't get disease. So building on Robin's comment that we are all nature, I would encourage us to think more about nature magic as a source of solutions.
Okay, good. Carly, what's your ask?
Help us create some partnerships for action that bridge the local and global. I think this is part of the complexity in this space. As I told you, we've got a global partnership going, and I've got a few other things I'm even learning from this panel that I'm going to go follow up to amplify that as well. We've got a big opportunity to also do similar things in Canada and link that into what we're learning globally. So looking for some anchor investors that are interested in leveraging that Canadian talent. I also think we have a very big value add in Canada, thanks to the fact that we have Indigenous elders and knowledges that this is where they emerge from and have a way to show us the path forward and how we can leverage that, and can we actually be smart and put Indigenous innovators and their knowledges ahead of the solutions here, I think is a big one that I'd love to talk more about.
Great.
I'm an optimistic person, but I'll admit I don't think global emissions are going to be reduced anytime soon. And so we need to adapt. And if we're not adapting for health, then I don't know what we're adapting for. I think this is a diverse audience, and these are diverse asks. And I think we need a more robust response to the impact of climate change on health, and be able to enable a whole of society response more so than what we're doing now, including recognizing that climate change here in Canada is a global health security threat. And it's not just what we do inside of our borders, but largely what's happening outside of our borders is going to impact our health outcomes.
Great, thanks. So now over to you. Raise your hand if you've got a commitment, an offer, or a question that you want to ask. I just want to see how many there are, so we allocate the time. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, so come to the microphones. We've got about 12 minutes, about 6 people. That means about 2 minutes each, just to give you a sense of the timing. And we'll start over here, and please go ahead. And I think I'm going to take them all, if that's okay with you, because we want to hear from as many people as possible. And I'll come back to the panel for any kind of acceptance of offers or commitments or reactions. Please go ahead.
Yeah, so thank you very much for that. My name is Marie Chantal Ross. I work for the National Research Council. This is a little bit orthogonal to what you're used to talking about, so perhaps this will be a very quick question. Everything you're doing is really good. We've heard about smoke, we've heard about heat waves, and we've heard about flooding, all of which are caused by an unhealthy ocean. And so, the ocean being pretty much the climate regulator. Is there any work that you're doing, particularly Kevin and Carly, but also Robin? Is there work that you're doing that looks at pathways that lead from health to the ocean or ocean to health? For example, we know that microplastics might be vectors for disease. We know that droughts are what causes forest fires, et cetera. And the heat dome, that killed billions of ocean species, and we need to have healthy biodiversity for a healthy planet. So if you could provide a little bit of context and if you're doing anything and how.
Great, thank you for that. So question, comment 1 is around oceans. We got about 8 people now, so 1 minute and 30 each. Go ahead, please.
Hi, and I'm Tasha Nathanson with 7 Leagues Leather, and Marie Chantal stole a little bit of my thunder by mentioning microplastics. But what I noticed that was missing in some of your interaction of health and climate change are plastics, which the speaker from HP mentioned a lot of people don't understand are made from fossil fuels. I'll say that textiles, people really don't understand often that all that polyester, nylon, all those synthetic textiles are also made of fossil fuels. Those are plastics. They shed microplastics. You know, and to personalize it, I have a family member with an incurable autoimmune disease, microplastics potentially implicated. Another who has terminal colon cancer, potentially, like these are serious health impacts that are tied in with fossil fuels. And most of the energy is going into recycling synthetic textiles, which continue to shed microplastics. So just to put plastics on the table and also the connection to textiles, like these are such interconnected systems that even something like fashion is connected to your issue, and to encourage that cross-boundary thinking.
That's great. Thank you. Oceans, plastics, over to you.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think what I'm really interested in is looking at what creates systemic health in communities and our connection even to the land. And I think that there is this, I've worked in this at the grassroots for more than 30 years and seen an absolute decline in the engagement of people, ordinary people at the grassroots, and that systemic, like the conditions that allow people to come together for, there is incredible potential when people can work collaboratively. Those conditions have declined dramatically. And I'm wondering if some of you could speak to how that's being addressed, because otherwise it's just siloed solution. Great, but honestly, the massive shift will happen where we're engaging with the with communities that are connected to the land and to the place.
Great, thank you. Oceans, plastics, communities, and
Hi there. Thanks to the panel. My name is George Benson. I work for an organization called the Zero Emissions Innovation Center. I think my question is mostly for Dr. Howard, but maybe Robin as well. I'm really interested in these action plans and roadmaps, how things get down to the ground, specifically in terms of professional governance. So we have colleges of physicians, of nurses, of many other healthcare practitioners. I'm an urban planner. I've been very involved in that aspect of professional governance. I'm really curious, how do you think these principles and values and some of these actions land into the rules that govern our professions? And if you have any thoughts on how do we learn from what the healthcare profession is doing and bring that into other sectors and other professions, I'd really love your thoughts on that. Thank you so much.
great, thanks. Oceans, plastics, communities, professions, and
My name is Justin LaRock. I've been a frontline mental health worker for a number of years. My question is primarily for Dr. Lin. I've seen the vulnerability to climate disease caused by mental illness, such as, like you were saying, displacement, as you have people who are being moved on a regular basis, that they're homeless every single morning, being moved, pushed off wherever they have their tent set up. We also see that as emergency weather shelters. The only emergency weather shelter on the South Island is in Victoria, and so the entire homeless population from, frankly, almost all the way up to Sydney and out to Souk is coming down to Victoria when there's an emergency weather event, such as cold weather or hot weather, both sides of it. And this is removing everyone from the communities and their supports as well. So how can we begin the conversations of mental illness creating a significant vulnerability both to climate-caused disease as well as the climate impacts of mental illness, the single-use plastics in harm reduction, as well as the reliance on takeout and your immediate needs rather than taking more climate conscious choices.
great, thank you. Oceans, plastics, communities, professions, mental health. This is going to get harder as we go. Please, go ahead.
Hi there, my name is Bella Claire Mackenzie, and I'm a North Island College, well, I'm on the student union there, and I do accessibility, and I'm also a in-person student at Douglas College on the mainland. And so I just completed, with straight A's, a class in philosophy. Also, I started in environmental ethics because in a little lending library, I saw your Peter Singer, I saw a book and it had an example in there in environmental ethics by you. So I would like to say that you're why I'm in this minor in my studies. And so my professor, he really went over these things called dialectics of process-oriented thinking. And so I just wanted to say, how can process-oriented community-based solutions, integrating maybe nature-based solutions and just bringing people together, how can process-oriented dialectics bring us towards a more utopian vision, and how can maybe imagery or bringing together bigger groups help with this? And I also want to shout out my professors, Dr. Richard Sandlin and Dr. Elliot Roster, who also does housing justice.
Great, thank you. So we've got 4 people. No, are you gonna say something too? No. Oh, 5. Okay, so we got 4 or 5 people. We got to do really quick because we want to have a quick reaction. So please go ahead.
Okay, I'm Mark Brown from the UN Food and Agriculture Organization, Near East North Africa Policy Team. My question was for Martin Edlund. First of all, congratulations on the Wabeckia progress, both the innovation and the creative capital stack. The question that I'm interested in, and I think maybe could be beneficial for a bunch of the innovators in the room, is what challenges with adoption at getting people to either opt into taking this human level treatment or not opting out, which, you know, some of the maybe vaccine promoting colleagues in the room have struggled with, and we know in international development, adoption at the ground level can be one of the biggest challenges. So I'd love to hear if you've had any challenges, or if not, maybe what you might attribute that to.
Great,
Thanks so much.
thank you. 3 more?
Hi,
Please, go ahead.
My name's Scott Baker. I work with Supermajority. I spend my time thinking about the political capital and political will associated with climate. Hi, Robin. I've got a high-level question, kind of a simple one. The story I've told myself about COVID retrospectively was that we basically failed it as a social and political process, but due to like amazing advancements in science, we were able to get through. On climate mitigation, it's kind of a similar story that I tell myself about it, that we're not doing what we need to do socially and politically, but with this breakthrough in solar energy and other technologies, we have kind of a shot at it. And so my high-level question for you is on the health side of things and in adaptation, is it kind of the same story where technology is the thing and we're not, on the social political side, it's not looking so good, or is it more nuanced? Thanks.
Thank you.
Hi, Alan Levine with the Canadian Centre for Food and Ecology. We're dedicated to inspiring Canadians to make food choices that are good for them and good for the planet. So given that our food system is both a leading cause of illness and poor health and the #1 cause of environmental degradation, what do you guys see as the role of food in changing things?
Great, thank you. And last question to you.
Hi, I'm Aaliyah Berry. I'm with the Canadian Medical Association, and I'm just hoping to get your thoughts on artificial intelligence. I know that we've spoken about innovation, and we're at a point in time where AI is not going anywhere. It is going to be implemented in healthcare, but there is this balance that needs to be had in terms of the environmental impact that AI has on like the double-edged sword. So I'm wondering to get your thoughts. Yeah, thank you so much for an amazing panel.
Great, thank you. So let's give it up for all those excellent questions and comments. We probably have about 1 minute each for people to just pick up 1 or 2 things that you found really cogent that you'd like to respond to, action-oriented if you can, and then obviously we'll follow up after this during the break and stuff. So Kevin, why don't you go ahead?
Yeah, so the question on oceans, I just finished interviewing women in Senegal who were facing displacement from oceans and erosion happening along coastlines. And as men have left villages to seek livelihoods elsewhere, this has provided opportunity for leadership for women. And the way women are stepping up in using palm fronds to create barriers and fencing along the coast in the sand to prevent more extreme weather from washing away villages has been very successful. They've also been planting mangroves to also further prevent erosion, which is also then providing habitat for oyster growth, impacting that food security pathway. So there is some interesting work happening on oceans, and I don't think we can or should be forgetting it. But to the comment, are we failing? In a way, I think we are, but in certain contexts. When I think of the women in Senegal, that is community coming together, that socioeconomic perspectives are advancing and working well to protect those communities.
Great, thank you. Any action you want to take from the things you heard?
Not off the top of my head.
Carly?
Great set of comments. I was going to pick up on the ocean thing. We do have a few solutions we've already supported that are underway. Happy to talk through those that relate to ocean health and how that's a route to health as well, similar to what Kevin just said. And then I'd also love to pick up, my way of saying it was around the kind of community dialogue really needing to be unlocked for a lot of these solutions to come to bear. Just a big yes. And I think this is where rethinking of like, who is an innovator, who is a solver, how do we get to them is really important. And that's part of what we do is make sure that we get uncommon people to the table and part of that solution making.
Great. Any action you want to take or anyone you want to hear from and connect with afterwards? I guess you just kind of mentioned it. Okay, Martin?
Two of the comments to pick up on quickly. One, I was intrigued by that question around, are we relying on techno fixes or are we relying on people and social change? And I think it has to be both, but I think the people piece is without which nothing is possible. And, you know, if we have a chance of changing mindsets about the climate problem writ large, I think it's through the lens of human health. I think health as the human face of climate change is our best, most tractable opportunity for how to inspire and change minds around this. And that brings me to the other comment from the colleague from the UN about adoption and kind of local engagement. Any conversation about innovative solutions for these problems has to start with trust. And there's so much misinformation. You know, COVID really brought that to new heights, and particularly around counterintuitive solutions like turning the mosquito into the solution for the problem. It has to be all about working with and through community networks, making them not just aware of the solution, but part of the rollout of the solutions if this is going to work. Because we've seen, and Burkina Faso halted activities around a different GM technology for mosquitoes, but you know, the example holds. It doesn't take much misinformation to stop these transformative life-saving solutions in their tracks, and trust is the difference.
Great, thank you, Martin. Robin's mad at me because she said, well, just take like 3 questions and then didn't quite do that. But anyway, Robin, please go ahead.
So I'm just going to touch on this notion that's come up a couple of times about being an anchor institution, and that's really what we're trying to be at Fraser Health. I think it hits on a number of the questions, though: plastics, textiles, systemic solutions, process-oriented thinking, social benefits, the role of food. Check out some later sessions. There's a wonderful one being led by Nourish this afternoon. It's a 2-part workshop all about food and anchor leadership. But the thing that I want to say about it is that we can have these solutions that really do it all. And when it comes to something like being an anchor leader, we can have environmental benefit, we can have social benefit. So single-use plastics is one example where the more we can convert to reusable options for things like surgical gowns, any sort of equipment and supplies where it's appropriate not to use that single-use option, we obviously save on the carbon footprint from being produced and shipped from overseas, individually packaged, used once, then thrown out. But we also have social benefits in terms of making our system more resilient to supply chain disruptions, to events like COVID-19. And it also helps our local vendors because we create these local circular economies where now those gowns get laundered right here in the Fraser Valley. And so we're creating jobs. We know that income, that leads to better health outcomes. So you see it comes full circle here in terms of social determinants of health, investing in our communities, investing in people, and also just doing the right thing as a health system. So that's where we're at. We're doing our best to bring all of that forward every day, and join us.
Thank you. Thank you, Robin. Oh, there you go. And Courtney, last word to you.
So for me, the opportunity in this, as all of the communication studies show, is that people work for the well-being of themselves and their families out of love. That is what motivates humans. Every patient I see at the bedside, they want to be well. They want their kids to be well into the future. We know that on a macro level, that's what the communication studies show as well. We know that health is one of the most motivating things, and health practitioners are motivating. So the more we can mainstream planetary health, I think within health institutions, and have that spread out into the community via anchor institutions, the more we can start to seed that from the ground up and work towards what I think is needs to be our new goal societally, which is long-term well-being for all, using metrics that are based on the SDGs and a planetary health lens. And so in response to some of the questions, when you think of that as your goal, what are the barriers? Well, within medicine, having done a lot of interviews, the senior leaders didn't know what they didn't know. So it's not like people are bad people. They have competing priorities and they're busy and it's not on the agenda. So the transformative change we have seen is when senior leaders have been briefed. People aren't dumb. Like, you put a graph in front of someone who's well-trained, they're like, oh. And so the key is to change the view from environmentalism as being something that's lateral to an understanding that we all live. The model I use is a planetary health nest. So I will get on I see the Canadian Medical Association president here in the audience. And so that's a huge win, really, from the perspective of influencing medical associations. That took 13 years of concerted effort to get our medical institutions, the colleges, on board. And the way that I presented a lot of data at first, so many Lancet studies. And what I finally realized maybe 5 years in is that it wasn't a head problem at all. It was a heart problem. What I was saying was making people sad, and it was making them guilty, and it was making them angry, and it was making them feel scared. And because they didn't know what the action item was, and they were busy, they couldn't grapple with it for long enough to figure out what to do. So what I would really invite you to do is to, in all of your presentations, look for 3 different parts to be a component. So the head part, the heart part, surface those feelings about 30% of the way in, and then the hands part. What do you want them to do next? And that means you have to do a lot of the legwork. The homework is on the back end. You need to show up ready to give people that first step. And so I think that with everything we've heard, we're making a ton of progress. As someone who lives in a place that's warming at triple the global rate and is deeply embedded at this moment in trying to keep that health system running, we will not be able to adapt our way out of this. And I was actually part of a Chatham House rules discussion at the last climate change negotiation, where The Economist convened health systems adaptation experts from around the world and said, can we adapt out of this? And they said no, consensus. So we are right now in the last part of our mitigation window, where we can essentially stabilize this complex adaptive system that we're all totally dependent on for our health and well-being. And so for me, what I'm working so hard to do right now with all of the different elements and networks associated is use the power of the health and health systems voice, including concrete change, because visual change motivates people more than anything else, to say, hey, climate change is the biggest health threat of the 21st century, and safety lies in a planetary health approach and adopting new metrics and a new goal. And so I think that really at this moment, AI, what we're using it for, is we're looking to use it to do a better job of mapping our network and matching what people need to demand, so we can, as quickly as possible, tip those socioeconomic and narrative tipping points to give people the head, the heart, and the hands that they want. So thank you for everything that you've offered in terms of insight, and I look forward to talking to you for the rest of the conference.
Great. So just to wrap it up, because we're at time, my summary is go to Courtney's thing, a great Canadian initiative where you can actually do something. If you're in a regional health authority or a hospital, or you're on a board, talk to Robin, because she's got some very concrete ideas. If you're interested in the capital stack idea, you know, the future of international development is going to depend a lot on multilateral development banks. This is probably the best concrete example I know of specific about implicating, in this case, the Asian Development Bank into a capital stack, and also local philanthropy. If you're a Canadian partner interested in climate and health, please join the Climate and Health Grand Challenge. And if you're struggling with what climate and...
Come find me and Keegan, my counterpart
Come
over
find
there.
Carly Ann Keegan, her counterpart over there.
Yep.
And if you're interested in kind of pinning down in your organization, well, what does climate and health mean? Get Kevin to come and help you because he did his whole thesis on it. So thank you very much. Thank you to the audience for all those great questions and comments. Thank you to the panel. And we're done here.
Don't you feel better with a doctor in a room, right? I always do. We're going to go directly into the, have a stretch. So look, yeah, have a stretch. Maybe we can lead the stretch, but don't go anywhere, please. We're going into the next session right away because of time constraints. And so it's my pleasure if the panel is close by and ready to introduce my old friend, Senator Pa Wu. Senator Wu is been in the Senate for some time, and this panel will deal with the 2030 challenge, transitioning Canada's industrial economy. And if the panelists are ready, and Senator Wu, if you're ready, welcome to the stage.
Well, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. As you've heard, I'm Yuen Pa Wu, Senator for British Columbia. My great pleasure to be moderating the session. But as the Senator for British Columbia, let me take the opportunity to welcome those of you who've come from afar to this province and particularly to this corner of paradise on Vancouver Island. The stage has been set quite nicely for this panel, which has the somewhat grandiose title of Transitioning Canada's Industrial Economy. This is, of course, a topic that is front of mind in Ottawa, and particularly with the new government. But I think it might be fair to say that we're not exactly clear what we are transitioning, where we are transitioning to, and what we are transitioning for. And certainly in the context of the discussions we've had yesterday and today on the SDGs, and particularly on climate actions, both 2030 and 2050 targets, I've not heard a lot from the current government about a transition of Canada's economy towards those ends, if we can put it that way. Now, the 2030 target, as you all know, is an SDG target for the 17 SDGs. It's also an interim target for our net zero objective. Net zero is supposed to be 2035, correct? But the 2050, I'm sorry, but 2030 is the interim target by which time we're supposed to have reduced emissions 40% below the 2005 levels. You may recall from the earlier presentation from the Auditor General, the Commissioner of Sustainable Development and Environment, their latest report has found us wanting on that interim target. For us to be able to catch up will require a lot of work indeed. And we have a panel to help us think through how we might do that. Not just the environment targets, but the broader question of transitioning Canada's industrial economy. You have the bios of our speakers in your program, so I won't go into much introduction, but I'm going to invite, first of all, our speaker, Dan Wolnischewicz, to kick us off. Dan is an advisor to BC's Clean BC strategy. He's reviewing it and coming up with new ideas. So I'm going to ask him to set the stage for where he thinks we are in our 2030 and 2050 targets and tell us what he thinks the problem is we need to solve. So Dan, over to you.
Great, thank you. So I think in order to be able to do this, we have to start by rewinding a decade. 2015, world leaders congregate in Paris for the international climate negotiations that led to the Paris Agreement. I think in retrospect now, it was perhaps a somewhat simpler time. We had President Obama showing up, working with President Xi from China. We had Chancellor Angela Merkel from Germany was wrestling President Vladimir Putin into the Paris Agreement. And we had a newly minted Prime Minister from Canada, Justin Trudeau, who went to Paris and brought premiers with him. And there were numerous selfies of the Prime Minister with premiers smiling together about global climate action and Canada's place in that. And I think it's also useful to look at what were the principles that underpinned Canada's negotiating stance in Paris, and that have really underpinned everything we've seen from the federal government from a climate policy perspective. So I'm just going to go through them. So the first principle was to act based on the best scientific evidence and advice. Second is that Canada will support and implement policies that contribute to a low carbon economy. Third, Canada will work with provinces, territories, cities, and Indigenous leaders. Fourth, Canada will help the developing world tackle the challenges of climate change. And fifth, and perhaps most germane to the conversation this morning, Canada views climate change not just as a challenge, but as an historic opportunity to build a sustainable economy. So if we then come back from Paris and we go into a series of new laws and regulations that were put into place by the federal government, ranging from putting a price on carbon pollution, both for consumers and for industry. Of course, that consumer price is now gone. The clean fuel regulations, the EV availability standard, myriad programs incentivizing individuals and industries to adopt cleaner technologies, from electric vehicles to heat pumps, to carbon capture and storage. And we also saw both the federal and provincial governments make their first forays into industrial policy, or something that they were characterizing as industrial policy, and that applied to everything from hydrogen to critical minerals, but I think most pointedly a focus on the EV battery supply chain and the prospects for Canada to be an EV manufacturer. And over that period of time, and in no small part because of these policies and programs, we have seen Canada's greenhouse gas emissions decline. We're at about 8.5% below 2005. That's about a 65 million ton reduction. That was where we were at in 2023. So it's not yet enough to be on track for our 2030 target, but it is putting us on the right kind of a trajectory, if we stick with it, to achieve net zero by 2050. Now, over that same period of time, the past 10 years, we also had quite a few disruptors. We had a global pandemic. We had the first iteration of a Trump presidency. We had Russia invade Ukraine, which had a cascading impact into energy markets and prices of oil and gas, which drove a whole new development cycle of oil and gas, but also a very different outlook for what it means to have secure energy, not just in Europe, but also in Asia. And I think one of the things that's become abundantly clear is that achieving net zero by 2050 is actually about energy transformation. About 80% of global emissions come from how we produce and use energy. So if we're going to achieve that outcome, we're going to have to transform how we produce and use energy. And in that respect, we're actually doing reasonably well, and perhaps better than many of us had anticipated. And I think a good marker for that is to actually just follow the money. And so what we see is that over the past 10 years, renewable investment is up 109%. Grids and storage investment is up 44%. Energy efficiency, 42%. Technologies that help us electrify are up 131%. And over that same period, investment in oil dropped 34% and investment in gas dropped 19%. There's still some stubborn investment in coal, but the trajectory for fossil fuels relative to clean energy is clear. In every year since 2016, investment in clean energy has exceeded the annual investment in fossil fuels. And last year, you can applaud that, that's good news. And last year, for every dollar that was invested in fossil fuels, $2 were invested in clean energy. So we have to recall that some of this it's a question of stocks versus flow. We still have a large existing stock of fossil energy in the system and in various technologies that combust fossil fuels. But when we look at the flows, where is capital flowing? It's flowing into clean energy and clean energy technologies. And we're beginning to see the results from that, of course, in China most acutely. So here we are now in 2025, Trump 2.0. And this is very different than Trump 1.0. Yes, he did the same thing he did before, which was exit the Paris Agreement. But this time, he was able to actually fundamentally undermine how America had been trying to position itself from an industrial strategy and from an energy transition perspective. So the Inflation Reduction Act and its myriad supports for not only deploying clean energy in the United States, but trying to build up domestic manufacturing capacity, also creating opportunities for Canada, that's largely going to be undone. And so in light of all of that, I think if we read the newspapers here in Canada, or if you go on LinkedIn or other social media platforms, the outlook we have right now for energy transition in North America and in Europe, it feels pretty negative. And yet, despite all that, when we look at what's happening everywhere else still in the global south, in China, in those places where energy demand is increasing the fastest, it's still a good news story. And I think part of it is within North America and in Europe, so much of that energy transition and that experience we've had was centered on net zero and trying to reduce emissions. And so now when that's no longer the flavor of the day, it's, if we look at where climate change stacks up in public opinion in terms of priorities, it's further down the list, usually number 5 or number 6 in terms of issues of concern for Canadians. But for the global south and for China especially, they look at energy transition not just through the lens of net zero. In fact, for most of them, the primary driver is energy security. What does it look like to become less dependent on importing fossil fuels and less at risk of the volatility that accompanies dependence on those fossil fuels? And we've really seen, I think, as everybody will recognize, that China has emerged as a unique actor, not just in terms of the scale at which they're deploying wind, solar, electric vehicles in China, but the extent to which they are dominating those supply chains and production of those technologies, not just for their own use, but for export. In particular, if we look again, countries in the global south, we look at Belt and Road, China is getting a very significant foothold in exporting those technologies to those markets as well. And what's emerging from all of this is the rise of what some call the electrostate and the risk to and potential decline of the petrostate. And there's a French energy analyst, Anne-Sophie Corbeau. She works at the Columbia Center on Global Energy Policy, and she I think, captured it quite succinctly. So I'm going to read a quote from her. So she writes, "What is emerging are two competing models of energy and influence, one anchored in the enduring logic of hydrocarbons, the other in the accelerating promise of electrification. At stake is not just the future of energy systems, but the contours of geopolitical power in the decades ahead." So I think that captures well what Prime Minister Carney keeps referring to as a hinge moment. And I think if we try to put this in perspective from a Canadian perspective, I think it's useful to think of it in this way. So right now, we're the 4th largest producer of oil in the world. We produce a little over 5 million barrels per day. By 2030, Bloomberg New Energy Finance projects that electric vehicles will be displacing 5.3 million barrels per day of oil. I'm not saying that Canada is just going to be singled out and we're no longer going to be able to produce and export oil, but to give you a sense of the scale and the speed at which this transition is now unfolding and having material impacts on oil and gas markets, I think needs to be paramount in our minds when we're thinking about projects of national significance, when we're thinking about what it looks like to reorient our economy through industrial strategy and through new trading relationships. And I think we're in a relatively unique situation in that we are a very significant producer and exporter of oil and gas, and we benefit significantly from it. But we also do have the building blocks to be able to compete and succeed in a more electrified future. We have the critical minerals that go into clean energy technologies. We have the clean energy resources and technologies to build out our electricity system in a massive way to power that economic activity and to reduce the dependence that we have on oil and gas in our own economy and the impacts that we experience when those prices spike, often because of geopolitical events that are well beyond our control. So electrostate, petrostate, we have the unique opportunity to choose, and what it means to make a choice is to successfully develop and deploy industrial strategy that leans into those areas where we have some unique comparative advantage and to double down on those. So I think I'm going to leave it there, and now we'll talk about what that industrial strategy looks like.
Yes, we will, but let me just summarize a little bit what you've said. It would seem to me that your interpretation of the session theme of the industrial transformation is the choice between an electrostate and a petrostate. You seem fairly optimistic that we are headed down the road of an electrostate. I'd like other panelists to take up that question and the audience to think a little bit about that as well, because what I'm seeing in Ottawa is relatively less discussion on the electrostate and much more on the petrostate, but we'll get back to that shortly. Our next panelist is Bentley Allen. He's been doing a lot of work on industrial strategy. Bentley, tell us if you agree with this priority of becoming more of an electro state, and tell us how you think industrial strategy might help us in that direction. Please.
Thank you so much, Senator, and thank you all for being here. It's a real pleasure and an honor to be at the Victoria Forum. I wanted to pick up on a story that Dan started with looking at the Paris Agreement, and I wanted to say that I think something really tangible changed after 2015 in the global climate conversation. And it wasn't because of the agreement that was put in place at Paris. If we look back at what the states of the world agreed to at Paris, they agreed to what we call a ratchet mechanism, which is basically we're going to set a target, and then we're going to meet back here every 5 years, and we're going to assess progress towards that target, and then we're going to set a more aggressive target the next time, we promise. And this ratchet mechanism was originally floated by the Japanese negotiators in 1990, and the Europeans laughed it out of the room, and they said, if we deploy a ratchet mechanism where we just say that we'll make an agreement and 5 years come back and review it, the world won't take us seriously. And yet in 2015, that exact same agreement was what was touted as progress on the global climate file, right? So something radical changed around 2015, but it wasn't because of a piece of paper that was signed in Paris. It was because of the radical cost reductions that were happening in solar and wind and batteries. And there was a question down here from the floor just at the end of the last panel, which said that, you know, maybe the progress is not happening because of politics or social progress, but because of technological progress, right? But there's an implicit division right there between politics and technology, which I think the history, just looking at how we got here in climate, does not hold up, right? Those cost declines in solar and wind and batteries did not emerge from thin air. They emerged from explicit choices by the Chinese state to make a bid for scientific and technological leadership in a dangerous political world, right? So China, seeing the geopolitical writing on the wall, wanted to be a great power, wanted to lead an energy revolution because it looked at the experience of the British Empire and the American Empire, and it said, how do we get to be number one? We lead an energy revolution. We make ourselves indispensable to the global energy system, and that is how we will do it, right? And so what is driving climate action today is not a climate model. It's not free-flowing concern for trees and the bacteria in the bellies of the insects, which when folks cheered for technology winning in climate, I felt like jumping out of my seat and cheering for that bacteria on the previous panel. I was like, yeah, you get that dengue. But what is driving climate action today is less our concern for modeling or climate or even the forest fires that are affecting our air quality every day, and more the economic and geopolitical imperatives that we are seeing in a dangerous world. So I want to lay out, first of all, that I think here in Canada, we're facing three interlocking crises, right? The first is the climate crisis, and it's not going away, right? The forest fires are here, and they will be here. The extreme heat will be here. The extreme weather affecting folks in the tropics especially will be there. The possibility that the monsoon in India shuts down, leaving hundreds of millions of farmers without the rains that they need in order to feed one of the most population-dense regions in the world, that crisis is not going away, right? And we have to keep that crisis in mind, right? But at the same time, Trump's threats against Canada's economic and military sovereignty have raised a second crisis, that we have become far too dependent on the United States of America and the goodwill of whoever is sitting on Pennsylvania Avenue. And interlocking with that is Dan's comments raise a third crisis that we have not yet recognized as a crisis. We are a small, open economy in the formal parlance of international economics, and we are dependent on our exports. And our number one export, $190 billion last year, is fossil fuels. And as Dan has pointed out, it is no longer a question of if, but when that number starts to go down. And we are macroeconomically dependent on that number. So we are in the middle of a slow-burning economic crisis, and we're just not having a national conversation about it. Instead, the national project list probably will feature 4 or 5 projects which are meant to double down on our ability to export fossil fuels to other countries, right? So we're going to double down on our ability to export into markets with falling prices. It's not that our oil won't be purchased. It will be purchased. It'll just be purchased at $40 a barrel instead of $80 a barrel. And that actually, Cenovus is cool with. You know, some of the costs actually in the tar sands are quite low. They're very efficient producers globally, and so they will continue to survive on much smaller margins, right? But the question is whether or not the country will survive when its GDP takes the hit that it will take when that number goes from 190 to 100 and then maybe to 60 or maybe to $40 billion a year, right? So the imperative that we have as a small open economy that is dependent on its exports is how are we going to go down the rest of the export table and increase the exports that we have in critical minerals, in wood, in manufactured goods, in retailed goods, in the other products that make up the economic activity in this country, right? And so the good news actually here is that we can address all 3 of these crises at the same time, right? We can develop an industrial strategy that is designed to diversify our trade, that is designed to address the climate crisis by continuing and deepening the cost reductions that were initiated by Chinese industrial strategy, therefore making those technologies just plain economic sense. Again, we don't need to care about the climate in order to drive an electric vehicle at this point. It's just cheaper and better. It's a better experience, and it's just cheaper both in terms of the life of the vehicle, the maintenance costs and the fuel costs, but now starting this year, it's going to start to be cheaper on sticker price too, right? Just last week, Ford announced a new platform for electric trucks that they'll be introducing a $30,000 electric truck in 2027. So again, even in the belly of Trump's beast, Ford is continuing to press play on technological progress rather than go backwards on fossil fuels, right? And we can do all of this while we create geopolitical leverage, while we can make Canada's economy matter in the global economy, right? And we do that especially through critical minerals, right? This is the #1 geopolitical leverage point that China is able to exert currently. Trump just lost a trade negotiation with China. I mean, you wouldn't get that from reading the newspaper, but that's the reality. That is what happened. He threatened major tariffs on China, and China said, well, I'd like to see you make an F-35 without rare earth minerals. And he said, you got me. I'm going to drop the tariffs. Can those rare earths please flow again, right? Now, if we as a country, Canada, had taken the advice of some experts, some which may be on the stage, I don't know, maybe, and in 2018 really doubled down on a rare earths refining and extraction strategy, right? Instead of slow playing it, giving just enough money to make it say that we're doing something about it without actually doing anything about it. It's sort of a Canadian tradition. Then we would be in a position right now of immense geopolitical leverage. Every great power in the system that wants its automobile supply chains and its air fighter supply chains to continue to operate smoothly would want contracts with Canadian producers, right? Instead, we're back to square one. It's 2025, and we still have to say, wait, who's going to mine the rare earths, and where are we going to refine them, and how are we going to separate them properly? And the thing is, we have the expertise to do all of these things extremely well in this country. This plays into our competitive advantage. It plays into how we are going to develop economic opportunity in the energy transition, but we're just not attacking it with the amount of purpose that we need to attack it with, right? And so I think that there's actually a silver lining in the story that Dan is telling for climate policy in Canada. And in many ways, I think we put the cart before the horse. We put in place a stringent climate policy before we developed the economic interests that would be necessary to support that climate policy politically, right? So instead, the climate policy gets into political trouble. We're forced to fall back on economic motives for climate action. But that's okay, because we needed to build those economic motives in the first place. We needed to take them seriously, right? And now finally, we have some global geopolitical impulses that are pushing us to take those forces seriously, right? And we can respond with things that are win-win-win.
That's terrific, Bentley. I think what you're arguing is that the economic logic and the trajectory of the global economy should be driving the choices that we're making today for our industrial transition, and those choices would almost automatically lead to more of an electro state than a petro state. But I have to tell you that this is not a conversation I'm hearing in Ottawa at all. To go back to Dan's initial comment on why China chose to go with the electro state trajectory, it was because they wanted energy security. It wasn't necessarily because of climate change objectives. And they wanted energy security because China is an energy deficient country when it comes to fossil fuels. So it makes a lot of logic. But Canada doesn't see itself that way. Canada sees itself as a fossil fuel abundant, a net exporter. And the voices of industry in this country that want to build on that natural comparative advantage are very, very strong. And on the geopolitical side, while China has a clear reason for going electric for geopolitical protection, the Canadian the discourse today is all about not offending our American neighbors even more and not incurring the wrath of higher tariffs. So the logic of much of what we're doing is really to align with American energy priorities, such as, for example, imposing 100% tariffs on Chinese EVs, right? It's not done to protect a Canadian EV industry, it's to align with American objectives. So on that, I want to turn to Bill Lazonick, who lives in the US. He's Canadian, so is Bentley, all 4 Canadians here on this panel. Bill, you've studied the American economy very closely. You understand how it works. Tell us a bit about what it is we need to avoid when we try to protect our interests in the United States and how we can chart a path that's in Canada's interests.
Hey, thank you, and it's a pleasure to be here. Canada was my, might say, home and native land until 1968, when I, after completing my undergraduate degree at the University of Toronto, I departed to study economics in Europe. The same year, the Government of Canada published the report of the Task Force on the Structure of Canadian Industry, Watkins Report, which documented an extremely high level of control of Canadian industry by US multinational corporations. As I left Canada at that point, I had no idea that I was embarking on an academic career in which the US business corporation would become my main area of expertise. That's what I'm going to talk about mostly today. Since 1970, when I entered a PhD program in economics at Harvard, I've done this work based in the United States. Over the intervening decades, the US corporate economy has changed substantially, including the rise of startups, global value chains, new global competitors, especially Japan, Korea, Taiwan, and China. Along the way, US corporations became infected with a socioeconomic disease, which I call predatory value extraction. Poisoned by the corporate governance ideology that I've been a long time critic of, that a company should allocate its resources to maximize shareholder value. Canada needs to avoid this business model. Now I'll tell you why. Maybe some of you already know. Predatory value extraction occurs because public shareholders have the power to extract value from the corporation that is far in excess of their contributions to value creation. The antithesis of predatory value extraction is what I call progressive value creation, a system of corporate governance that seeks to ensure that distribution of the gains of value creation rewards households as workers and taxpayers commensurate with their contributions to the value creation process. Progressive value creation distributes value to workers who engage in the collective and cumulative learning that is the essence of the innovation process, as well as to taxpayers who fund government investments in knowledge and infrastructure, of which business corporations make use. Public shareholders, by contrast, just buy and sell outstanding shares. Yet the operation of the stock market can permit massive predation. An example, hedge fund activist Carl Icahn realized $2 billion US in 2016 through the sale of Apple shares that he had purchased on the stock market for $3.6 billion in 2013. Yet not 1 cent of that $3.6 billion went to Apple for investment in productive capabilities or any other purpose. He just bought and sold shares on the market. Not to be outdone, Warren Buffett, often known as a patient capitalist, used his control of Berkshire Hathaway to buy $39 billion US in Apple shares between 2016 and 2018. As of June 2024, Buffett had a net gain of $158 billion, yet not 1 cent of its original purchase of Apple shares, $39 billion, flowed to Apple. All Buffett did was buy and sell shares and cheerlead the next thing I'm going to talk about, which is the key to predatory value extraction, the repurchase of a corporation's own shares, also known as stock buybacks. Between 2013 and 2024, Apple used 91% of its very ample profits to repurchase $726 billion US in shares from the stock market, a massive manipulation of the company's stock price that enriched Icahn, Buffett, Tim Cook, Al Gore, who was on Apple's board, and many others. The company also paid about $157 billion, equal to in dollars, equal to about 20% of profits in dividends. Instead of buybacks, Apple could have increased the pay and enhanced the careers of the workers in its stores. It could have contributed to more to social causes. In response to the Black Lives Matter movement, Apple did put $200 million into a racial justice initiative in 2020-2023, but that contribution was only 0.06% of the amount that Apple wasted on buybacks during those years. Apple could have invested capital in critical technologies in its supply chain. For example, with a fraction of the amount spent on buybacks, Apple could have invested in a state-of-the-art semiconductor fab to manufacture its smartphone microprocessors. Instead, from 2007, Apple outsourced the fabrication of iPhone processors, first to Samsung, then to TSMC, Taiwan, putting these Asian companies to be enabling them to become world leaders in advanced chip manufacture. Meanwhile, leading U.S. fabricator, Intel, which is not much in the news lately, did $145 billion in buybacks from 1998 to 2021 and fell behind Samsung and TSMC. In 2021, the new CEO, Pat Gelsinger, said no more buybacks as he tried to implement an investment strategy to regain the lead in global competition. But Gelsinger was forced to resign December 2024 when Trump was elected as US president again. Now Trump has become directly involved with Intel, which is certainly the beginning of the end for this once iconic US company. Okay. Apple also has outsourced rechargeable batteries to South Korea and Korean and Chinese companies, enabling them to become global leaders in the EV transition. So it wasn't simply, though it was very important, the investments that the Chinese government made, but it was also the actions of American companies in the global value chains. The United States has no competitive EV battery makers, reflecting the financialization of the US chemical industry going back to the 1990s with lots and lots of buybacks. The plunder of the publicly listed corporation in the United States affects all industrial sectors. Pharma companies such as Merck and Pfizer say they need high drug prices to fund the next round of medicine innovation. Yet spend in excess of 100% of their profits on distributions to shareholders. Boeing did $43 billion in buybacks from January 2013 to March 2019 as it sold unsafe planes. The second crash of the 737 MAX on March 10th, 2019 brought that market manipulation to an abrupt and tragic end. For the decade 2014-2023, S&P 500 index companies, largest companies in the United States, distributed $6.5 trillion US dollars to buybacks. In buybacks, 6% of net income, and 4.9 trillion is dividends, another 41% of net income. By doing buybacks, companies that have been innovative throw away their competitive advantage, rewarding senior executives with their stock-based pay and hedge fund managers who count buybacks as money in the bank. In turn, the looting of the publicly listed corporation has funneled money into private equity, which plunders vulnerable firms, including in the United States, many in healthcare, with the dividend recapitalization as the value extracting analog to buybacks in publicly listed corporations. And under the second Trump administration, the United States has gone, somewhat logically, and I think this is the subject of my next book, from the plundering of the corporation to the pillaging of the nation. Canada is not immune to the American disease of corporate financialization. For example, in 2009, 2010, faced by competition from Apple's iPhone, Research in Motion, BlackBerry, did $3 billion US in buybacks, as one of the founders sold a substantial portion of his shares. In 2022, Canadian supermarket chains, Loblaw, Metro, and Empire, did 2.3 billion Canadian in buybacks while they refused to continue pandemic hero pay to their employees. Buybacks by US big pharma companies, which continue to dominate drug sales in Canada, boost the prices that Canadians pay for medicines. I have a recent article on this, while denying Canada R&D commensurate with those sales. And remember Nortel, the manipulation and speculation that is accompanying the current AI mania will make the internet boom and bust, in which Nortel first rose and crashed and burned, look like the good old days. Thank you.
From plunder to pillage, that's a good line. Rather depressing though. Bill, you started by saying that you're trying to make a plea for Canadian industry to not follow the American model, but it sounds like you think Canada is already mimicking the American model. Is that correct?
Well, it would be good to have a complete study of this, and I've never actually been able to get the funding to do a study. There is one sense in which I know Canada recently, and last year, 2 years ago, I think, mimicked the United States. Stupidly, the United States adopted a 1% tax on buybacks, which I argue just legitimized buybacks. You don't want the revenue. Canada imitated that with a 2% tax and thought they were doing something about the issue. But it's a problem. It's not as big a problem as it is in the United States, but that American disease spreads around the world. I've done a lot of studies of what's going on with financialization in Europe and in Asia as well.
Yes, well, maximizing shareholder value is a mantra here as it is in the United States. But let me ask you about the alternative, which you call progressive value creation. And my understanding of the way you've described it is that it's not simply the distribution of the gains more to labor rather than capital. It's also about the reinvestment of corporate profits into new industrial capacity, right? So workers may not necessarily benefit in the first instance, but it's about building the country's economic strength. So I want to open this question to you and to Bentley and to Dan as well about the role of Canadian industrial policy, maybe along the lines of this progressive value creation, how that helps us do the transition of Canada's industrial economy to one that, I won't use the word electro-state, but I'll say that one is consistent with where the future is going, consistent with maximizing well-being and economic welfare for Canadians. Maybe I can start with Dan.
I think, so one thing just to lead off with is, I think if we look at the behavior of the Canadian oil and gas sector in recent years, where we've seen exactly this, we've seen much less of their wealth being reinvested back in capital investments in production. We're seeing a lot of buybacks. And I think we have to look at that in part as, you know, what signal does that send in terms of the longer term confidence, recognizing that if they are to deploy capital, typically, especially for an oil sands project, you know, these need to be long-standing projects. These are not just, it's not like shale in the US where you make your capital outlay and you get your return within a couple of years. These are much longer, much more intensive projects to develop. And, you know, what we're hearing from the oil and gas sector right now is, to the extent that they're going to deploy capital in Canada, they need public dollars to do that. And for a while, it was just that they needed public dollars if they were going to do good things like reduce emissions by investing in carbon capture and storage. But now we're hearing that there need to be public dollars to just even facilitate their expansion and access to new markets. We ended up with a publicly owned pipeline, and when there are conversations about additional pipelines, there isn't private sector interest in that unless there's going to be a role for public dollars as well. So I think we need to look at that for the signal it's sending in terms of their own confidence in the long-term viability of their current business model. There have been a number of commentators who have looked at what's been happening, not just with Canadian oil and gas companies, but with the majors as well, and said, this is what you would do from a business strategy perspective to manage decline. This is not a sunrise industry, it's a sunset industry. And yet, to Bentley's point, this isn't a conversation that we're having in Canada. And so I think if we are going to be thinking about the economy and what's next, we actually have to think about what's next. And that means not doubling down on something that, yes, has been very beneficial to the country, but is not going to take us to where we need to be.
Yet the conversation around what we call projects of national interest, many of you know we passed a bill just a couple of months ago to set up this new body. Much of that conversation is around how we build an east-west pipeline. And even if it's not economic viable from a private sector perspective, there should be some government support for it to happen. But you're saying that would be the wrong application of what Professor Lazonick calls progressive value creation.
I think we have to acknowledge that we only have so much in the way of both public dollars, but even just when it comes to making policy and just the mind share of our political leaders. And there's an opportunity cost. When we do one thing, we can't necessarily do another thing. And I think that's where there are these trade-offs. Some of the other projects of national significance that we're hearing about are offshore wind in Atlantic Canada and more east-west electricity transmission. Those aren't getting as much attention because they don't have the same kind of incumbent force and they don't have the same presence in the economy today. Oftentimes it's Crown-owned utilities. So it's a very different conversation in Ottawa based on who's showing up in Ottawa and lobbying for what ought to be the priorities for the government of the day.
That's an important word, the incumbent force. I want to turn to Bentley now and talk about the opportunity costs and the alternative use of government funds and other, let's call it surplus capital, to invest in the things of the future. Industrial strategy, in other words. I mean, we are dipping our toe into this area. As you know, we've put large sums of money into EV battery type projects in this country. Quite a few of them have failed already. You know, I think about Northvolt, of course. Stellantis is having trouble. The Ford project apparently is on the skid. Samsung is having trouble as well. Bentley, can we do this right? I mean, Was it a mistake to try and invest in these battery facilities, which seem to be going south? And how could we have done it better?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I would just say overall, my perspective is not that we lack the capital necessary to do this properly. I just think we're not allocating it efficiently or effectively, to be perfectly honest with you. And I think that the battery factories are a great case in point, right? This was a reactive decision that was made, right? The IRA was passed in August of 2022. And immediately the project proponents, which wanted to already do battery factories in Canada, knocked on the door of the PMO and said, well, it's going to cost you about what the IRA would pay us to put it in New York. So can you cut a check for that? And again, we did not have a public conversation about this. We did not have a public conversation about the sticker price, right? Or even how the tax credits were structured. And people don't even know, right? Does anybody know? How much are we spend? How much were we slated to spend on 3 battery factories? Anybody know?
At least.
1.6, way too low. Anybody want to guess? 45 is just a little high. It's about $40 billion, actually. If you do the math to match the production of those battery factories to the IRA, you would end up with about 40 billion based on the stated production. But the thing is that it's based on how much batteries actually get produced, right? So again, there was a newspaper article out a couple of weeks ago that said we had outlaid 40 billion on the, no, we haven't actually outlaid anything because it's indexed to production, right? So we can't even have an intelligent conversation about what our subsidy was, let alone make an intelligent decision about whether or not it was a good subsidy in the first instance, right? And in many ways, we're doing the exact same thing right now. The Carney government has announced $1 billion for the steel and the aluminum industry, a special supplement to the Strategic Innovation Fund. And if you look at the spending in the Strategic Innovation Fund, I would press any one of you to find something either strategic or innovative that the Strategic Innovation Fund has spent money on, including in, go ahead.
And yet they did that. So let's talk about the real politics of this,
They
right?
signaled to
Yeah.
the industry, we're going to subsidize you before we have any clue what you're going to ask us for or what we would want for that money, right? So we have $1 billion that we've put on the table, and we've just said to the steel and the aluminum companies, come and lobby for this. We don't have any strings or strategy attached to it. Here's $1 billion.
Tell us about a good way to do industrial policy that points us in the right direction.
Absolutely. I'm glad you asked. Do you know anyone in Ottawa?
Oh, yes.
So just on steel, for instance, right? Again, let's take a 2050 perspective, right? What's the global economy going to look like in 2050? And what role do we think Canada should play in a global 2050 steel industry, right? So there's an idea, maybe, that we'll still be making a lot of steel with met coke and raw iron in 2050. That's the way that we do it now. We bring metallurgical coal, some of it from here in our beautiful BC mountains. And we combine it with raw iron, some of which comes from Quebec. And we put it in a blast furnace and we make steel. That's like 150 years we've been doing that, right? How many industries do you know that are 150 years old that aren't primed for disruption? The steel industry is ready to be redone, and we have technologies that are being developed in every other country except Canada that will revolutionize the way that we make steel. In the United States, electrolysis is becoming commercially viable, which is a way of making metal by charging electricity through those elements instead of lighting them on fire. So you can already imagine there's way less emissions because you're not lighting anything on fire. You're running electricity through it. Oh, and that electricity could be clean. Yeah, okay, well now we're starting to get somewhere. It'll be way cheaper to make steel through electrolysis, way cheaper, right? And we could do it really well because we have access to a lot of clean energy and we have a lot of untapped clean energy resources, right? So if energy becomes the #1 input into electrolytic steel, then we could have an important comparative advantage. But in order to do that, we need to position ourselves now. And not just by having a foreign company come in and do FDI for an electrolysis pilot, right? but by building up the expertise in the surrounding ecosystem that will be necessary to produce intellectual property and the technology basis that those companies will want to use and that other countries will want to use when they go to make electrolytic steel, right? So taking an innovation mindset to knowing where the puck is going and taking an innovation mindset to building the underlying aspects of the ecosystem that will feed into that global industry. We don't know what our niche in a global electrolytic steel industry could be, but we know that we have an opportunity there, right? Now that's just the electrolytic pathway, right? Currently, the most commercially viable pathway for making green steel is what's called direct reduced iron electric arc furnace. And if you'd like to learn more about that, I'm starting my lectures at Johns Hopkins next week. You're welcome to come on down and sit in with the 18-year-olds. But in DRI-EAF, you do a lot more value add to the iron before it arrives at the mill, right? So think of it this way. Instead of sending raw iron and raw coke to the mill, where it's then transformed into something much more valuable, you add a lot more value to the iron before it arrives there. And I've already told you we have incredibly good quality iron reserves. And it turns out you can reduce that iron, using hydrogen and other things that we could also produce, right? So we could add a lot more value to iron for the steel that we make here in Canada in the DRI-EAF process, but we could also become an exporter of DRI and HBI and other value-added iron products, right? So again, I mean, I'm just thinking about this for 5 minutes right now. We're coming up with a strategic approach to how we position the Canadian steel industry in a future in which technological innovation will continue to happen, right? But instead what we did is we gave ArcelorMittal $300 million to make a business decision. It installed the same facility that it installed in Hamilton in Corpus Christi with zero public dollars, and we paid them for the pleasure of doing the same thing in Hamilton. We gave them old technology that we subsidized with our Strategic Innovation Fund. We're not taking a strategic approach.
Well, as it turns out, we don't have Canadian-owned steel industry. The Hamilton facility is owned by an American company. The American owner has actually supported Trump tariffs against Canadian steel for the purpose of supporting that owner's American steel facilities. So there's a clear conflict of interest here. I'm going to turn to Bill now and just ask you for your reflections on how American industry I know you're a big critic of the corporate ethos in the United States, but they are adjusting. American business is adjusting in a unique way to Trump's approach, and they're making the most out of it, partly for personal benefit, but also to attract new investment into the country. How real is this? To what extent is it really going to hurt Canadian industry? Because they are Canadian companies who, out of the need for survival, are maybe thinking about relocating south of the border simply to maintain their businesses. Give us a perspective from south of the border.
Yeah, well, first of all, I agree. There's no shortage of finance. There's no shortage of technological opportunity. The players have to put it together. I argue you don't just need policy. You need the business enterprises that have the expertise to go along with it. And any company that I've studied, and the ones I mentioned, they are full of expertise. It's not a matter of they don't have the capability. It's that the people who are running those companies aren't pulling it together and often chase the good people away. Okay, but now I'd see first of all, what's going on under the Trump administration is just a bunch of cowardice, a lack of perspective, business billionaires. I mean, you saw them on the dais with Trump at the inauguration. I think that will live in infamy, that picture of Bezos and the others, because these people have so much power and they go to someone who they know is basically a moron. I mean, there's no doubt. And the policies are moronic. They have no consistency. So people have asked me to comment on them. What are you going to comment on? Because you don't know what's going to come tomorrow. The bigger problem for me, or a big problem that needs to be addressed, particularly since we're at a university, which is co-sponsoring this, is the nonsense that comes out of economics department. So several years ago when I was teaching an introductory economics course, I hadn't done it in a long, long time, I went back and looked at the textbook that I used in my very first course at the University of Toronto, Paul Samuelson's economics textbook. And if anybody's interested in the articles, I have a few articles on this and some lectures. what you are taught and what millions and millions of students are taught today in introductory economics courses and carries with them insofar as they understand economics later on is that the most unproductive firm is the foundation of the most efficient economy. Anytime you hear someone talking about the problems, market imperfections, market failures, you know they don't know what's going on in the economy. It's organizations that determine what happens in the economy. Households as organizations, government agencies as organizations, business corporations as organizations, civil society organizations that lie with them. And the way the economy works, in fact, is a way in which you have to control market forces, not be subjected to them in order to be successful, in order to have what I call sustainable prosperity. Progressive value creation is an understanding of that reality, and it's a challenge to what I call the myth of the market economy. And the arguments that are made for the kinds of policies that just enrich the people at the top and immiserate everybody else, they are based on the myth of the market economy. And I'm sorry, not even progressive economists, since I use the term progressive, like Joseph Stiglitz or Paul Krugman, confront that issue. They buy into this myth of the market economy, a totally bankrupt microeconomics. And so that affects the policy changes, the policy conversations, I should say. Now, I should say that, at least in the US, I haven't had much of these conversations in Canada, but in the US, I've had a lot of progress in getting politicians to recognize the problem of corporate financialization, including people like Joe Biden and Elizabeth Warren, Senator Tammy Baldwin, another senator. There's even legislation in Congress on this. But as soon as they realize the implications of it, or as in Biden's case, get into power where they can actually do something about it, they run away from it. And they will just not address these issues. And I think this is a huge problem right now in US politics from the Democratic side. I don't know if any of you have read this book, which I think is quite insidious, is the last thing I'll say. Abundance by Ezra Klein and Derek Thompson. One of the things they say in there, which just gives it all away, they never talk about inequality in the whole book. Okay, one thing they say, just in passing and laying out the scenario for the future where we actually solve all the problems by getting rid of government regulation, is that everybody contributes to AI, so everyone will profit from it. That's incredible. You just need to look what's going on day by day today to know that's not true. Yeah.
Well, look, I think what's more dangerous than a free market dogmatic economist is a free market dogmatic politician who doesn't understand economics, and we've got a lot of those. But I mean, we live in a market economy, and one of the big questions that Canada has to face in terms of its decarbonization strategy is the whole issue of EVs and how we promote the use of EVs, whether through domestic production, industrial strategy, through imports, which part of supply chain do we want to get involved in? Do we use the market, as the mechanism, or do we intervene massively? We've got an EV mandate, as you know, which a lot of people are unhappy with, particularly my friends in the auto industry in Ontario. Dan, start us off on this question.
I think the first thing to recognize, and I think, Bentley, you made this point, is that EVs are actually just better. From a consumer perspective, they're just better vehicles for getting around in. They're a nicer drive, and they'll save you a hell of a lot of money on fuel costs. So I think, the direction of travel is clear. The world is going to electrify vehicles. Even all of the North American automakers who are complaining about EV mandates, they're all doubling down on those investments. Part of this is it's a question of timing, and it's a question of who are going to be the winners and losers amongst automakers. And there's a lot of consternation in North America and in Europe that they're being supplanted by the Chinese, who are now making the best, cheapest cars in the world, and they happen to be electric. So I think we don't have these kinds of conversations in Canada about these trade-offs. So right now we've got, we've had a lot of public dollars, to Bentley's point, that have gone into trying to stand up the battery supply chain and to hopefully support some EV assembly in Canada. that can be great for the economy in those parts of the country where there's going to be investment and there are going to be jobs created. If at the same time we're imposing 100% tariffs on Chinese-made EVs, we're doing a disservice to Canadian consumers, because right now it is hard to find a cheaper EV. So I think we're going to have to weave together some of these different conversations around affordability, around what are some of the priority opportunities for our economy and where we want investment. Who are we trading with? These things have to be woven together as opposed to living in their individual silos and never really intersecting when it comes to policy making, the government ministries that are responsible for it, or the conversation that we all have as Canadians.
What would you do? Let's get off the fence here. Come on. Like, what would you do in order to help us transition to the vehicle of the future? I mean, it's the one that's cheaper, it's better for the economy, it's a better drive. That's what you're arguing. You're not talking about politics and so on. How would we get there?
Okay, I think there are several things. I think we need to keep the supply mandate that we have. It is providing certainty to the marketplace to drive investment, both in supply, but not just the supply of electric vehicles. You talk to any of the companies that are providing EV charging, and they look to that supply mandate and they said, that gives us line of sight on how fast to build out EV charging. And we can go to banks and we can have bankable projects because we have that policy providing certainty about how that market is going to evolve and how demand for EV charging is going to evolve. So it plays a really important role in sending that signal. Do we need to make it a little bit less aggressive? Sure. For those people who really react to the fact that right now it leads to a prohibition on gas cars, get rid of the prohibition. Take it to 90% and let the market take it the rest of the way.
And tariffs?
So on tariffs, I think two things. One is right now, to protect the North American auto sector, we have North American safety standards. The rest of the world follows a single set of standards that are different than what we use in North America. And we use that difference in standards to limit what vehicles can come into the Canadian market. If we were to accept, as Mexico does, both the North American standard and the international standard for safety, all of a sudden we would have more choice in terms of different models, different price points, different sizes of EVs that are made in Europe, that are made in Korea, Japan, China. And on tariffs, I would say, I would negotiate with the Chinese and I would say, we're interested in having Chinese EV technology in Canada. We'd like to have some investment in manufacturing those vehicles in Canada in the exact same way that we approached Toyota and Honda when they had more fuel efficient vehicles than were being produced in North America. We didn't want to buy them from them if they were manufacturing them and exporting them. So we convinced them to it and we allowed them and enabled them to invest in production in Canada.
Super. Bentley, what do you think? And I'm going to ask people who have questions to please start lining up. We probably can only take 3 or 4 questions. I am going to take liberties to extend our session to 12:50 because we started 10 minutes late. If that's all right with the organizers. I'm getting the evil eye. Maybe 12:45 then, if that's okay. So Bentley, and then we'll take a couple of questions.
Yeah, just on that, I mean, I completely agree that that we should keep the mandate in place, but I do think you can reform the credit system that underlies the mandate. The interesting thing about that mandate system is that it was pioneered in California, and then guess who copied it? China. But when China did it, it calibrated the way that they allocated the credits to support domestic manufacturers. And Tesla and the domestic manufacturers both benefited from the credit system, but Tesla was kept there explicitly as what is called actually in China as a catfish, which is a company that is there to discipline the domestic firms, which is to say it shows the domestic firms what the technological frontier looks like. And then basically now we're at the point at which the Chinese firms are as good as Tesla. I don't expect Tesla to last long in the Chinese market at this point. Now, I'm not saying we should copy that approach, but this is taking a strategic approach to using a market-based mechanism that has a clear industrial strategy goal, right? And that's what we're actually missing in the current context in Canada. We're doing a lot of things, and I don't mean to come off quite as acerbic as I'm coming off, because actually I think we're doing a lot of good things in a lot of different areas in Canadian industrial strategy. But what is missing is this kind of tying of things together, right? And leaving programs as important as the EV mandate credit just on autopilot, right? That we're not actually calibrating that for our industrial strategy. The same thing when we subsidized medium and heavy duty vehicles through the MHZEV program that the federal government had. Again, here was an opportunity because we actually have OEMs, original equipment manufacturers, someone that actually produces the vehicles of medium and heavy duty trucks and vehicles in this country. New Flyer, the Prime Minister was there at their facility. Nova Bus. We actually make those in this country, but we didn't tweak our own credit program to favor Canadian firms, right? We allowed foreign firms to get the same benefit as Canadian firms when we did that credit. So we've got all of these programs out there that are just really easy to make simple tweaks to that would create demand pull on Canadian manufacturing. And we're just not using those tweaks. And those are non-fiscal levers for creating demand for Canadian goods. And there's a ton of them across the economy that we're just not taking advantage of. And so that goes back to the finance conversation. In some of these cases, we don't need new finance. We just need to stimulate internal demand through the appropriate use of the regulatory levers that we're already deploying for climate reasons. We're just not also deploying them for industrial strategy reasons. So that's what I mean when I say we've got win-wins lying around everywhere, because we've done a lot of good things, but we need to start tying those things together into a strategic approach and taking that broad view. I don't know, I feel like people just feel like it's un-Canadian or something like that, like to set a target and be accountable for it and actually try to achieve that target through a strategic approach. Like this is something we can do and we can do it well. We just need to get to work on it.
Okay, keep the mandate, but stitch it together with a strategic approach to industrial policy that uses the existing programs and financing to create domestic industry. That's basically the answer. Terrific. I think my
content. We're sending too much content south of the border, and that gets to the trade diversification problem. If you look at our exports, number one, oil and gas, number two, automotive, $90 billion a year, most of which is going to the United States, right? So, but the thing is, in oil and gas, we run a trade deficit with the United States, right? Like they buy a lot more than we buy from them. But in automotive, it's basically 1 for 1. So for every dollar we export, we import a dollar across that border, right? So a good way to increase your exports is just start doing some displacement of those imports on the automotive side and increase the Canadian content that is being purchased on the Canadian side of the border. And this is something that actually that Prime Minister Carney campaigned on. He said we were going to have an all-in Canada industrial strategy for automotive. He didn't call it EVs at that point, but any way of separating yourself from American policy at this point will push you in the direction of EVs, I think. But that hasn't come back now. And I think your point on the projects is important, but we're coming to this period now in the fall where we have to get back to actually having a strategy, not just doing projects that could end up being less than the sum of their parts, but actually having a strategy.
Dan?
I just want to flag one thing that, and we're not going to solve it on this panel or in this room or over lunch, but one of the real challenges too is the extent to which these issues have become politicized and polarized. And anything right now that in any way is tied to climate has become not looking at, we don't have opposition politicians saying, I want to achieve the same outcome and I'm going to do it in a different or better way. They're saying anything you can do, I can get rid of. And we hear that from folks in the business community who say they need certainty and predictability. And one of the challenges we have right now with the political cycle and the polarization is that we're not necessarily allowing ourselves the patience to see some of these policies, whether it's industrial policy or whether it's climate policy, come to fruition. The federal EV availability standard is not even yet in force, and Pierre Poilievre can't wait to get rid of it, right? And the automakers can't wait to get rid of it. So, we have to have a little bit more patience. I'm not sure what the solution is to enable that, but it's going to continue to hamper us if we can't keep things in place for long enough for them to work.
Terrific. I'm going to just take 2 questions. If there's time, we'll take more and see if our panelists will respond to them collectively. First, I'll start with my colleague. Please introduce yourself.
Yes, hello. My name is Rosa Galvez. I'm an independent senator like my colleague, Pao Wu. And so he's right. The discussion in Ottawa is not about Canada becoming an electro state. It's more like how can we keep being a petro state? So the conversation was a lot on the geopolitics and the economic. But I know there is a lot of things too in the technological and environmental, in the social, in the health. I came from Bogota, where I learned that 1 barrel of petroleum produces $175 of damage for the environment and for the health. So we sell our petroleum, I don't know, as low as $24 or as high as 60, but it will never be $100 a barrel anymore. So we are causing a lot of damage. So my question is, who should pay for this industrial strategy? And I will be happy to be lobbied by you guys, because I used to be the highest lobbyist in the Senate, but it was mostly from the lawyers of the oil and gas that produces, all that a lot of disruptions. And so it is interesting that when I go away and I am in the global south, they say how the pension plans of Canada are the wealthiest, and they are investing in renewable energy in these countries. But when I come back home, I don't see them investing. So who should invest in this? We talk about changing the cash flow. And I would like you to touch the issue on the subsidies, because it is true that we have to manage decline. And I want you to tell me the billions that we pay per year, what it signifies for the oil and gas sector. I being said, that is the amount that they pay in human resources. So if we are paying to have jobs in the oil and gas sector, we can pay to have jobs in another sector. So thank you so much for your answer.
Thank you, Rosa. This side, please, if you'd introduce yourself and ask
Sure, thank you. My name is Heather Lynn Ramackle. I'm representing the artist mindset here today. So I am partnered with my husband in a project, we call it the Decades After Paris Music Project, Paris referencing the Climate 21, or the COP21 climate talks. And this question actually hurts my heart a little bit. I'm a happy EV owner, although I did take the bus today. And as an EV owner, I've become anxious about travel upon BC ferries, for example, because now I'm told that I'm unable to have a broken down EV travel on a ferry. But also I think about the very visceral images from the LA fire, and represented in those images is an unprecedented toxic problem with our burned EV batteries. And so I'm really conflicted on this, because if we're thinking about the future and our industrial economy, and we're also, as I think, Dan, you mentioned, like weaving these conversations together, including from this morning, how are we preparing our policy and our investors in these industries who will eventually be held accountable for the onslaught of wildfires that cause these toxic damages? So really curious to know, is that in the conversation right now?
Okay, thank you. I'm going to ask our panelists to respond. The questions are connected, right? It's really about corporate responsibility and the extent of subsidies that are going to oil and gas, and the unaccounted for costs, downstream costs of oil and gas and other industries that are not being properly compensated for. So maybe, Bill, you can start.
Yeah, well, I mean, this is part of the problem, that business has adopted what's suitable for them and not what's suitable for everybody else. It needn't have been that way. So recently, I've been looking at the history of the rise of shareholder value ideology in the United States. And I was there at Harvard Business School when they hired a guy named Michael Jensen in 1985. And then I saw it, really come in and take hold. So there was one person who really pushed corporations towards shareholder value, Ralph Nader. He had the impact of Ralph Nader in getting Clean Air Act, getting all kinds of legislation, just drove business crazy. It led to Milton Friedman writing his famous article in 1970, which was in the context of GM trying to put public interest people on the board of General Motors. It drove a guy named Lewis Powell, who became the Chief Justice. I know people in Canada have heard of the Powell Memo. It's quite well known. It was just a screed against the left, and Ralph Nader was right in the middle of it. And part of the reason Ralph Nader was there was he was not. Actually, I was a leftist student in the early 1970s. Ralph Nader was, I saw him more to the right, but he was effective. And there was a response of American business to that effectiveness that said, we're going to get rid of all this. And it ended up becoming, basically now Project 2025, but it was a long time building. But basically it was something that in the 19, a company like General Motors knew that it had to produce cleaner and safer cars once Ralph Nader attacked them. And they tried to do it. For example, they shifted quite unexpectedly from leaded to unleaded gas. In 1970, they announced that they would no longer produce lead gas vehicles. And that was because of environmental activism. But they organized in opposition to environmental acts. And every time you had the California CAFE standards, they found someone to put in office to get rid of them.
Action, reaction. Bentley?
Yeah, I want to respond maybe more to the spirit of the question rather than the content of it, which is that when I hear anxiety about the potential environmental damage that the energy transition itself is going to cause, I go back to the macro perspective, the big global perspective, right? Which is, what is the most mined material in the world today? It's not nickel for electric batteries. It's not copper for electric lines. It's oil and gas. That's the #1 product that creates environmental destruction in this world. And if you can start to eliminate the footprint that oil and gas has on planet Earth, you are having a net good, right? And it's okay if there's a little bit of toxic battery sludge in the LA fires, because we've eliminated huge swaths of forest and land that has been destroyed by coal and oil and gas mining. That's okay. We can feel good about that transition, regardless of the negative consequences that we see in the present, right? And I think that we have an opportunity in Canada. Again, we came up with this like beautiful idea, right? Because we were listening to the economists who love beautiful ideas, which is that we were going to be able to take all of those environmental externalities that we were creating from our fossil fuel system, and we're going to roll them into a carbon price, and we were going to use that carbon price to move our national emissions up and down like it was on a lever. And that was a fantasy. That was a fantasy which put too much faith in the models that we have of emissions, right? And it was a fantasy that climate change was a technocratic problem that could be solved by policy that didn't make us break eggs. But we have to break some eggs. At the end of the day, getting rid of the oil and gas industry globally, it's a form of war. And we need to have weapons on the clean energy side, right? And those weapons look like mining copper, mining nickel, because that builds economic interest in rural communities in this province and in other provinces in this country that need to see themselves as having a role in the net zero future. It creates corporate interests, which I agree they shouldn't be as strong as they are, but guess what? They're really strong. And so you need them on your side if you want deep decarbonization to happen in this world, right? And so industrial strategy is about flipping all of that and saying, actually, instead of worrying about incremental emissions reductions that come out of a model, we're going to think about the systems that we have in this society, and we're going to take a structural transformation approach to those systems. And that's the approach that we really pioneered at the Transition Accelerator 7 years ago now. And if you want to hear more about how we can use structural transformation to change climate policy in this country, then check out the work of the Transition Accelerator, because that's what we're trying to do. We're not worried about little megaton here, megaton there, right? We're going to transform the transportation system, and the transformation of the transportation system is going to reduce demand for oil and gas, and that's the way it is.
Okay, Dan, last word to you.
I think the only thing I would build on Bentley's comments is, I think the first iteration, let's call it Climate Policy 1.0, was future emissions target driven backcasting using models that we've over-indexed on and that have a false level of precision to then develop not just carbon pricing, but any number of regulatory levers. and it works to an extent. But I think to his point, it is challenged by the politics, right? And policy is forged in the crucible of politics. And so I think what we're hearing from, particularly those politicians and those volunteers who go out and knock on doors, is that we do need to calibrate some of this to the lived experience. And so I don't think it's just about technological transformation. To Heather's comment, I think this is about transformation more broadly. So when I think about transportation, I don't just think about how can we get everybody into EVs. I think, how can we get people out of cars? How can we have them living in communities where they don't need to necessarily experience car ownership and all the costs that come with it, even if it's an EV? So what are we thinking about in terms of how we get around? But these are the kinds of transformation conversations that we need to have, and they happen in the technological realm, they happen in the social realm, and they also have to happen in the political realm.
That's a great way to end a session on transformation. Please join me in thanking our panelists.
And thank you very much to the panel. I was just thinking, good luck crossing the border. Wish you well. You're very brave, but there is, as I said earlier, in a more serious tone, that some of the comments that we heard yesterday, and it just came home right now, that somebody said it, there is power in words, and your words this morning were quite powerful, and we enjoyed it. Now, I have some very simple things to say before we have lunch. The 30 people are online. We've captured your comments, and they will be in our report. Another very important thing, I was reminded by somebody moments ago, that the paper cups that you have around you that might be here in terms of our own environment, could you please take them to one of those 6 baskets that have 7 ideas of where you put each one into each one, which is very difficult because the slots are very small, but it'd be very, very helpful to do that. And my other notes were just has to do with lunch. It's inside the David Strong building, and our volunteers will show you there. So thank you, Senator, very much. Good to see you again on this panel, all panels this morning. Boy, if there's ever a test, thank you very much.